Chapter 61. We are fearless. Daughter of war, what kind of battle is worthy of our action? Under the winter night sky, a sound like thunder echoed across the land, echoing in the ears of every bear and every spirit walker. Sejuani, who was sitting on Steelman's back, saw the hunter lord's eyes roll up, and then turned into a pool of black water. When he raised his head behind him, a thunderous voice sounded at this moment. Sejuani's eyes narrowed and she quickly came back to her senses. She smiled and answered in a voice heard by both armies. I will burn down all the defences of the Noxian Empire. I will tear down their stone walls and houses so that no one in the world will dare stand against us again. Then she pointed south. Every inch of land where ice and snow fall will belong to me, my name will become their nightmare, and our tribe will rule forever. For a moment, only Udur's cloak fluttering in the wind echoed her declaration. Above her, dark clouds swirled like a storm. Ask for our power. After the silence, the sound of thunder continued. Who will you sacrifice? The hunting lord said in the voice of a spirit bear. Udur suppressed his mental confusion, but countless consciousnesses entered his mind, and he could only speak with all his strength. We only offer war and those who died in war. Boom! Above the dark sky, deep purple thunder raged, seemingly destroying everything in the world. When Sejuani looked up and saw the terrifying presence looming above her, she knew its true horror. Its fur stood on end, and lightning raged in its flesh. Its scars were glowing, and thunderbolts poured out of its mouth, as if it was about to explode in the next moment. Sejuani felt the most intense fear she had ever experienced, and she had just come close to sacrificing herself and her clan to the Ursine. This is the true power of the immortal Thunder Volibear. She looked at her former mentor, Udur, in awe. At some point, he found a power powerful enough to compete with such a terrifying existence. Are you afraid of our war, bear spirit? Udur's hair and beard were dancing wildly, like a lion, roaring towards the thunder in the sky. Even though his consciousness gradually became confused, the pain from the silver thorn in his palm continued to keep him awake. Volibear in the sky roared again, becoming less and less like a bear. The flesh and blood seemed to begin to float away, and the muscles, hair, and bones began to separate, with only the endless lightning connecting them. The immortal Thunder Volibear assumed an offensive stance, but before it could launch its attack, Sejuani rode directly towards him, blocking Udur. Storm and Wild Bear! Do you fight alongside us? Udur shouted, or do you fear our war? After waiting for a long time, Volibear lowered his gaze and gave an answer. We have nothing to fear. Then, under the wind and snow, the thunder gradually dispersed. On the pale snow, the bear people stood in a messy row. Under the leadership of the hunting lord, they walked towards the Winter's Claw tribe and joined their array. Noxus Empire, Southeast Island Group. Looking down from the sky, islands of different shapes are like bright pearls scattered in the vast sea, contrasting with the blue sky. Of course, this scenery would be even more beautiful if you ignore the flames igniting on the island and the smell of blood filling the air. Falgren, a towering city standing in the center of the island. Legion advisor Wilson walked hurriedly on the wide road outside the city. His weather-beaten face was full of exhaustion, but his bright eyes were still full of determination. Wilson, don't worry. Leon, the orderly officer walking beside him, looked at the Legion advisor beside him and spoke softly. The rebellion here has just ended, and there are still many unrest elements intent on assassinating Noxian officers and nobles. It's not that I'm in a hurry. Wilson turned his head and stared at the orderly Leon, who was wearing armor and wearing a noble badge. The war with Winter's Claw is about to begin, General Darius's order must be conveyed. Okay. Service Officer Leon's eyes flickered, he shrugged his shoulders and looked up at the war-torn city in front of him. Then let's go find Lord Kled. He is dealing with the stubborn rebels in the city. If it weren't for Wilson's unexpected arrival, he would be in the city right now, talking to the men from the Chamber of Commerce, and collecting some due protection fees. Maybe some of them would support the rebels, but so what? Kled was only in charge of the military side. And he, Leon, is Falgren's orderly officer. Enter the city along the wide road. Wilson saw damaged buildings and a dilapidated environment. On the messy streets, Noxian soldiers could be seen everywhere. They occupied the traffic arteries, and many cold corpses lay at their feet. Judging from their clothing and weapons, they were rebels at the Battle of Falgren. Keep going. Groups of Noxian squads began to appear frequently, with solemn expressions and blood-stained armor. However, after seeing Wilson and Lion, these Noxian soldiers saluted, After walking more than 100 meters, Leon stopped in front of a low-rise building complex and said to Wilson behind him. "We have arrived at our destination, the rebels' lair." The sea breeze blew gently through the ruins of the building, bringing the smell of sea salt and fresh ocean breath, but it suppressed the strong smell of blood that filled the air. As far as the eye can see, this cluster of low-rise buildings has been damaged by the war. Large areas were destroyed, buildings completely collapsed, and narrow roads were damaged, leaving the area looking devastated. In addition, countless corpses can be seen piled up in the ruins, and the flowing blood turns into red streams, flowing through the roads and flowing into the underground waterways. With a solemn look on his face, Wilson followed Leon's footsteps and entered this bloody area under the protection of Noxian soldiers. Among the ruins of the war, there are still many survivors. They look hesitant and numb. When they see the armored Noxian soldiers, they will kneel down and dare not move. "Don't be nervous." Leon stepped over the body at his feet and whispered to Wilson. "We have won the battle, and Falgren has returned to the embrace of the Empire." He pointed at the survivors on the roadside. "They will become slaves of Noxus. Well, those who behave well may become citizens of Noxus. In short, the Empire has completely taken control of Falgren." Perhaps thinking of something, Leon pointed at the Noxian soldiers and survivors around him. "You can take a look. If they have good qualifications, they can return to the northern border of the Empire with you. I have no doubt that General Darius will train them to be fine soldiers for the Empire." Wilson frowned, but he still maintained a calm tone and said, "No, business is important. I need to see Lord Cled quickly." "We're almost there." Leon looked deeply at Wilson, maintained his aristocratic manner, and quickened his pace. However, before he could finish his words, a rumble of trampling could be heard in the distance. This was accompanied by cheerful inquiries. "Hey? Leon, who wants to see the great Admiral Major Sir Cled?" Chapter 62. First Cray. The warm sunshine in the sky, with a little bit of ocean moisture, sprinkled on the ruined buildings. On the bloody street in the distance, a mysterious figure riding a desert dragon lizard gradually appeared. His weapon was already stained with blood, and tiny pieces of flesh and blood could be seen on the worn armor, but this did not prevent Wilson from recognizing his identity. The furious knight Cray. That was also the purpose of his trip. When Cray came closer, Wilson's tired face glowed, and his bright eyes had a strange color. It is hard to imagine that a Yodel would join the Noxian Empire. In the many rumors circulating on the Valoran continent, the Yodel are a peaceful and gentle race. They prefer to pursue fun and a little bit of mischief, and their moral compass usually points to kindness and mercy. The fearless and violent Yodel Cray is the embodiment of the will of Noxus. He participated in most of the wars launched by the Imperial War Group in history, and received many different titles in the war group. For example, the title of Admiral Major just now is one of many titles. However, Cray's image as a general did not last long, and it was completely shattered in front of Wilson. "Skr, don't move." Cray seemed to be unable to bear the desert dragon lizard under his feet. He stepped on Skr's head angrily, making it walk in a straight line and come to the crowd. "Lord Cray." Wilson took a deep breath, adjusted his red and grey robe, walked forward, and saluted Cray respectfully. "This is the Legion advisor." Leon also walked forward and spoke. "Shut up, Leon." Cray spoke sternly to his orderly, and then rode Skr and walked in front of Wilson. "I remember you, Wilson, Darius's Legion advisor. What's the matter?" Looking at the short and imposing Cray in front of him, Wilson took out a wax-covered letter from his robe and handed it over. "This is the letter General Darius asked me to hand over to you." "Darius?" Cray looked surprised, and then seemed to think of something. The corner of his mouth cracked, pulling out a graceful arc, and his sharp teeth were like a beast showing off his skills. "Ha ha ha ha, did he encounter setbacks in the war with Winter's Claw?" Cray stood on the back of the desert dragon lizard, laughing loudly while polishing off the wax and opening the letter. As he finished reading the letter, the smile on his face gradually disappeared, leaving a solemn look. "Swain, this guy?" Cray frowned, because he had to deal with the rebellion on Falgren Island recently. He didn't hear the news that Swain made in the capital. The old guy Darkwill finally got his comeuppance. Cray laughed loudly. Then he looked at the blood-stained buildings behind him, and tyranny was surging from his only intact eyeball. "Wait for me for half a day, deal with things here, and I will set off. Also, Leon, go and open Noxtera for me." "Noxtera, A portal made of black stones dug out from the mountains around the immortal fortress, the capital of the Noxus Empire, has risen on most of the Noxus city roads. It is precisely because of the existence of Noxtera that the Noxus Empire's aggressive pace can confront all enemies and expand continuously. Kree seemed to see Leon's worry, and said with a ferocious look, "Don't worry, I will leave the most docile lamb. As for those guys with bared teeth, I will send them directly to hell." Rebellion against Noxus? Ridiculous. As soon as the voice fell, Kree began to hit the head of the desert dragon lizard with the bloody axe in his hand. "Skarl, get moving, we have a lot of work to do next." With the departure of Kled, the originally silent nest once again surged with waves of blood, eroding every place and every corner of Falgaren. They carried the anger of Noxus and drowned all the rebels. The desolate and silent snowfield was howling with a biting cold wind. A line of slightly messy footprints was deeply imprinted on the snowfield, as if silently telling the pedestrians difficult progress in the cold. Huo Jixing looked at the snowflakes circling in the sky, falling on his face, bringing a piercing feeling like a needle. He looked at the Noxian veteran who was buried in the ice and snow beside him, and said in a serious voice, "Sharuba, find a shelter, let's rest." "Okay." Sharuba responded in a deep voice, stretched out his hand to wipe the ice residue on his brow, left the team alone, and entered the cold and silent snowfield. About a cup of tea later, guided by the marks left along the way, Huo Jixing and his party walked into the desolate forest. The vegetation in the forest was withered, and most of what could be seen were withered trees and rocks. It was a desolate scene without any breath of life. Huo Jixing casually found a dead tree, leaned against the frozen trunk, and began to rest. Although there was still cold wind in the forest, it was much better than the snow on the mountain road. The Noxian scouts also found their positions, took out dry and hard food, and recovered their consumed physical strength as soon as possible. Huo Jixing slightly loosened the tightly wrapped fur cloak, took a breath, and looked down at the body in the composite armor. The loss of blood and chi caused by the previous use of Sozaku Renmyu beyond the threshold has been almost compensated by lighting Lusua and the recent nutritional supplements, and the smooth muscle lines can be seen. The knife wound caused by Baloric the Toothed Crow gradually recovered under the healing effect of Nanli fire. This made Huo Jixing feel relieved. After all, the frozen land of Fruljord is filled with deadly dangers. Only strength can ensure their survival. Creak. Creak. Heavy footsteps left sounds on the snow. Huo Jixing looked sideways and saw Oaks walking over, his empty left sleeve swaying in the cold wind. In order to avoid wound infection and excessive blood loss, Huo Jixing directly used Nanli fire to burn the flesh and blood and seal the opponent's wounds. Even so, Oak's body could not withstand the continuous trauma and became extremely weak. "There are people following us. I don't know the exact number, but my feeling is unmistakable." Oaks looked pale and bloodless. He was wrapped in a thick fur cloak and tried his best to resist the cold, but his hands and feet still felt cold. "We don't have many choices. There is definitely no way to go back the way we came. Now we can only take the East Mountain Road to avoid the gathering place of Winter's Claws." Huo Jixing looked at the Noxian scouts around him and nodded silently. The Winter's Claw must have received news of the defeat of the Fang Crow clan. With the violent nature of the Northern clan, they will never be allowed to leave this snow alive again. "Don't worry, we have exceeded our mission and also killed the leader and elite warriors of the Teeth Crow clan." Oaks curled up in his cloak, his pale face unable to suppress the sparkle in his eyes. He looked at the silver-white snow and chuckled. "These are enough to explain to General Darius, and we can also gain enough military exploits. In the past few days, they once again attacked a supply convoy and burned all warm clothing. It was also that massacre that made the followers behind him show their flaws. Then I'll listen to you and go back through the mountain road to the east," Huo Jixing said. He looked at the rolling snow-covered mountains in front of him. It seemed that there were no more chirping of birds and insects, only the cold wind whistling in his ears, as if he had entered another world. This made Huo Jixing feel the horror of death. Chapter 63. Woohoo! 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 The howling cold wind carried the snowflakes all over the sky and blew through the Iron Thorn Mountains. Perhaps because we are approaching the coastline, the cold wind gradually carries the smell of the sea, but the increasingly cold wind seems to be able to penetrate people's souls, making people feel bitingly cold. The Noxian scouts who moved forward were silent, with only the crunching sound of their feet on the snow. It's not that they don't want to talk. Within the scope of deathly silence, only the presence of their partners can make them feel the breath of life. However, the cold wind kept howling, its direction changed erratically, and the snowflakes rolled up almost obscured everyone's vision. The constant biting chill scratched their faces like sharp pebbles, leaving them breathless and speechless. Huo Jixing pulled out his leather boots from the snow, reached out to wipe the snowflakes from his cheeks, and looked back. A flash of red light appeared in his eyes, and the world instantly turned into fiery red. Following you again. Huo Jixing saw a wisp of blue cloud rising in the distance, but it was extremely faint. If he didn't look carefully, he might have ignored it. They are playing a cat and mouse game. Oaks, who was beside him, saw the changes in Huo Jixing's pupils and said with a solemn expression. Whenever they wanted to take a break, the other would show up. It's like dog skin plaster that you can't get rid of. Oaks once wanted to set up an ambush to ambush the other party, but he didn't want the other party to notice it early and never come over. Until the ambusher left and reappeared, hanging behind them. Yes, they want to waste our energy so that we can't get effective rest. Huo Jixing took out the water bag from his waist and took a sip of cold water that chilled his heart. But this guy is too cunning and calm. Oak's expression darkened as he thought about his recent plans, all of which were ruined. Then let's spend it first. According to the plan, we have bypassed the gathering place of Winter's Claw and entered the mountain road to the east. Huo Jixing put away the water bag and smelled the fishy smell of the sea in his nose, with a solemn expression. The guy behind you can't help it. Unless you want to watch us leave the Iron Thorn Mountains. Huo Jixing patted Oaks on the shoulder, then looked at the sword boy Hainai beside him, touched his frozen hair, and said with a smile, take good care of Oaks. Then he shouted angrily at the Noxian scouts behind him, work harder. Let's cross the mountain in front and find a place to rest. A dull response echoed in the blizzard. The Noxian scouts wrapped themselves tightly in fur cloaks and groped their way through the wind and snow along the snowy mountain road. On the steep mountain walls, snowflakes covered the rocks. Young clan warriors wearing snow-white fur-knitted hats and grey robes ignored the smooth stones and stood on the cliff, looking at the hazy figures in the wind and snow in the distance. As expected of the elite of Noxus. He reached out and touched a snow-white fox lying on his shoulder, and said softly, follow them, don't let them leave your sight. The snow-white fox barked softly, then jumped into the snow and ran quickly. The agile figure and the scattered snowflakes are almost the same color, and it is completely unclear whether it is the white ground or the falling snowflakes. The young clan warrior was just about to keep up with the snow-white fox, but he seemed to remember something and left a blue mark on the rocks, which looked like the fox's paw. I almost forgot about them. The young clan warrior said to himself. I hope it goes faster and don't let these Noxian bastards get away. Wow! Wow! Snowflakes continued to fall from the dark sky, making a slight rustling sound. After a while, accompanied by the howling of the cold wind in the night, the snowflakes began to sway wildly, falling continuously and making bursts of sound. Fire! It's a bonfire! A young clan warrior emerged from the snow. The knitted hat he wore blended in with the snowflakes, hiding his figure. They're starting to take a break. Seeing a bonfire burning in the clearing in the forest, a smile appeared on the lips of the young clan warrior. He patted the cute snowflake fox on his head and crawled along the thick snow at the edge of the woodland, ignoring the mud on his clothes. The fox that saw him was approaching the crude camp. The young clan warrior carefully avoided looking directly at the bonfire in the open space, so as not to affect his night vision. Then he silently looked at the Noxian scout who was resting in front of him. Rune weapon? Sword boy, it fits. The young clan warrior compared the information provided by the Tooth Crow deserters. Tauren shield guard, it fits. War stonemason. Broken armed war stonemason, it fits. There are also 5 elite Noxian scouts, which is also correct. Wait a minute, the number of people seems wrong. There seems to be one missing. The flame extraordinaire of Noxus. The young clan warrior was thinking while scanning the simple camp in front of him. Suddenly, the cold hairs on the back of his neck stood up, as if a fatal danger had suddenly arrived. At the same time, the fox screamed. Fire! A touch of red gold flame. Encircled by the cold sword light, he cut through the snow curtain and approached in front of him. Sonoras! At the moment of crisis, the body of the young clan warrior leaped like a fox and rolled to the left. As his waist and abdomen stretched, he took out the Zhenbing dagger from his waist to resist the approaching sword light. Bang! Under the terrifying force, the young clan warrior flew backwards, broke the tree, and fell into the snow. This power! The young clan warrior suppressed his inner fear, ignored his numb arms, and looked closer, seeing his fox entangled with the enemy. He quickly made a sharp sound, calling his companions to leave. Whoosh! Whoosh! The flames were boiling, and the knife light was flashing. Huo Jixing stared at the snow-white fox flying up and down in front of him, waving its claws, and a trace of violence flashed in his red eyes. If it weren't for this little guy just now, he could have caught up with the young clan warrior. His intuition told him that the young clan warrior who was spying in front of him was the tracker who had been following them. Squeak squeak! With a sharp hissing sound, the snow-white fox avoided the knife light, retreated suddenly, and ran quickly on the snow, trying to escape from here with the young clan warrior. Want to leave? Huo Jixing's face sank, and he stepped forward. The red gold Nanli fire covering his body rose again, driving away the cold and snowflakes. Puff! The red knife flashed, like lightning, accurately hitting the running snow-white figure. Squeak! Squeak! The snow-white fox, which had just run a short distance, wailed in pain, and the red blood fell on the snow like plum blossoms. I remember you, Noxian bastard! Hearing the voice coming from the cold wind, Huo Jixing stopped chasing and looked at the figure holding the snow-white fox in the distance, leaving at a high speed, frowning. The agility of the young clan warrior is not low. With all his strength, he may be able to catch up with the opponent, but it will take a lot of time. And the difficult situation he is in now has to take care of his team. But it is not without gain. Although the snow-white fox just escaped, it left half of its tail and 2 hind legs, which is considered to be a big disability and suffered heavy damage. It's the Spirit Fox Wanderer. Chapter 64. It's the Fox Wanderer. Oaks walked into the melting snow, picked up the burned half of the tail and 2 downy hind legs, looked at them carefully, and spoke in a deep voice. Beast Spirit Walker? Huo Jixing asked curiously. Oaks looked at Huo Jixing's doubtful gaze and explained, yes, the Spirit Fox Wanderer is one of the cultivation states of the Beast Spirit Walker. They are the pathfinders and scouts of the Winter's Claw tribe. During the first battle of Fruljord, we fought against these fox cubs many times, with few wins and many losses. Hearing this, Huo Jixing's expression darkened. The War Stonemason's ability was fully demonstrated in this mission. The Fox Wanderers, Winter's Claw's pathfinders and scouts were actually able to suppress them. They are eager yet cautious, quick yet quiet, and wise leaders respect those who follow the spirit of the fox. Oaks thought of the Fox Wanderer who had just left in embarrassment, his expression became joyful, and then he spoke in a deep voice. I didn't expect these fox cubs to appear here. It seems that our return journey will be even more dangerous. Huo Jixing took back the half-scorched tail and 2 downy hind legs from Oaks's hands, then we can't keep these things. The red Nanli fire ignited, burning everything in his hand. Since Spirit Fox Wanderer is a pathfinder and scout, there will definitely be a large army behind him. I just don't know how many people are chasing me, or how many extraordinary people there are. Don't worry, his partner has been injured, and he will definitely not dare to get too close. Oaks looked at the snowy curtain in the distance, as if he saw the angry Fox Wanderer but could do nothing about it. In order to complete the ambush, the resting situation in the camp just now was an illusion. They deviated from their original route and chose to take a detour through the mountain road to the east, so the Spirit Fox Wanderer who had been following behind them would definitely not be able to help but come over to check. In the end, Huo Jixing discovered the clues and staged the drama just now. Unfortunately, no Spirit Fox Wanderer remained. Huo Jixing waved away the ashes in his hand, his eyes flashed with red light, and he saw the gloomy luck leaving in the distance. The clouds are too dim. Are you hiding your own aura? Compared with the previous cloud energy of Tooth Crow Baloric, Spirit Fox Wanderer's strength is not weak, but the cloud energy is too dim. Huo Jixing was thoughtful, then walked back to the camp, leading the Noxian scouts who had woken up to move forward at night. They can't waste their time now, it's a matter of life and death for them. In the valley where snow accumulates, a simple camp stood with bonfires lit around it, and many Winter's Claw warriors could be seen resting with their eyes closed. A long chase through the snow in this game of cat and mouse. Not only were the Noxian scouts tired, but as the pursuers, they were also a little tired. In the center of the camp, a tall figure that was different from other clan warriors sat cross-legged. He was not wearing any heavy fur armor, his arms were bare, and muscles like a horned dragon came into view. The body is covered with indigo tattoos, directly exposed to the cold elements. But he didn't feel any discomfort, because the threat of severe cold had long been ineffective against him. Quiet, Iron Thorn! Hearing the roar of the Juvisk wild boar beside him, the tall figure stretched out his right hand to comfort the strong monster. Smelling the smell of blood in his nose, the tall figure frowned slightly, looked outside the camp, and saw a thin young clan warrior approaching. "You're injured, Lur?" the tall figure said in surprise. Able to serve as a pathfinder and scout for the Winter's Claw, the Fox Wanderer's tracking and hiding skills are enough to surpass the tribe. The information about the Teeth Crow clan is wrong. Lur, the spirit Fox Wanderer, walked up to the tall figure and spoke in a solemn voice. "The fire extraordinaries of Noxus are very strong, and my partner is injured." Lear stroked the snow-white fox in his arms that kept making noises due to a broken hind leg. His pink eyes were full of pain. He admitted that he let his guard down because of his overconfidence. But that guy's strength is indeed very strong, far beyond what is described in the Tooth Crow clan's intelligence. "We can't wait any longer, otherwise they may really leave the Iron Thorn Mountains." Georgi Jufist pondered for a while, looked at Lear in front of him and the fox in his arms, and said in a solemn voice. "You also said that that guy's strength exceeds the intelligence information, so we need to wait even more. Otherwise, Baloric's fate will be our fate. Are you afraid?" Lear felt his partner's teeth biting the skin, and his expression became angry. "I didn't expect that you, who holds the title of Iceborn Warrior, would be afraid of a Noxian Transcendent. That's enough, Lur, you've lost the caution and quietness of the Pathfinder." Georgi Big Fist interrupted Lur's crazy words. "The Great War Mother Sejuani is waiting for our good news. Unlike other Iceborn with ice blood, Georgi is an Iceborn warrior with a title bestowed by War Mother Sejuani. Giant punch! You won't let War Mother Sejuani down, will you?" Georgi stared at the young clan warrior with red eyes in front of him. Suddenly, the Juvisk wild boar beside Georgi roared irritably, and stepped heavily on the snow with one hoof. At the same time, the injured fox in Lear's arms also roared, with a hint of fear in his pink eyes. "Who is it?" Georgi suddenly looked solemn, looking at the dark snowy night, and quietly clenched his gloved hands. "Relax, Georgi, it's me." The deep voice suppressed the rustling sound of the wind and snow, breaking the stalemate between Georgi and Leal. As a blue figure approached, a smile appeared on Georgi's cold face. "It's you, Hikaru." Around the blue figure, there were 5 huge frost-fang giant wolves following. These frost-fang giant wolves have a sturdy body like a calf, and their thick grey-white hair sways with their bodies, creating a white wave. While walking, the blue eyes swept over the Juvisk wild boar beside Georgi and let out a low roar. The natural hunters of Fruljord, it was their arrival that caused the abnormal reaction of the Juvisk wild boar and the snow-white fox. "Frostfang Shaman Shikaru." Lur looked at the middle-aged man with a blue mark in front of him, his eyes filled with fear. "Lur, if the Great War Mother Sejuani heard what you just said, you would be scolded." Shikaru lowered his cold eyes and looked at the young spirit fox wanderer. "It's just that Georgi has a good temper." Lur wanted to refute, but seeing the Frostfang giant wolves around him eager to try, he swallowed his words. "Since you are here, Shikaru, let's start this hunt." Georgi stood up, patted the Juvisk boar beside him, and sat on it. "Don't let Lady Sejuani wait too long. There are more heads worth harvesting on the Winterthorn Mountain Road." Seeing Georgi awaken other clan warriors, Lur spoke in a deep voice and called them. "Wait a minute. I suspect that the Noxian superhumans have unknown reconnaissance methods, otherwise they would never easily find me and avoid being surrounded and killed repeatedly." "Interesting." Frostfang Shaman Hikaru touched the fine stubble of his beard and smiled. "It seems that the fire ability of the Noxian superhumans is not simple. And his strength has improved so much in just a few days." He had just heard Georgi's narration and knew about Lur's failure and the fox's heavy damage. "But it is precisely because of this that it is worth our cooperation." Hikaru stroked the head of the Frostfang giant wolf and looked at the sky with the dawn glow, his expression was dim. "Frost will destroy them." Chapter 65. Have they caught up so quickly? On the rugged snowy mountain road, Huo Jixing stood on a strange boulder, looking back at the snowy mountains in the distance, his expression solemn. In his red eyes, many clouds condensed and rose, accompanied by the cold wind, moving quickly towards here. Roughly comparing the speeds of both sides, Huo Jixing's eyes gradually darkened, and a hint of uncontrollable killing intent overflowed from his pupils. Eric, let Zyluba and the others come back quickly. He first ordered Eric in the low hillside, and then turned to the sword boy beside him and said, Hainai, go wake up Oaks and the others who are resting. We have to set off as soon as possible. From the clouds, there are too many Winter Claw warriors chasing them, and their number far exceeds them. In particular, there are 2 clouds rising from the inside that are particularly eye-catching, which are even larger than the clouds of Toothcrow Baloric before. In addition, the Spirit Fox Wanderer hiding in the dark, staring at them. There are 3 Winter Claws in the pursuit team this time, and they are very powerful. It seems that they are not going to let us leave the Ironthorn Mountains alive. Huo Jixing licked his dry lips and realized the intention of the Winter Claw's pursuers. Whoosh! Whoosh! Facing the biting cold wind and stepping on the thick snow, Huo Jixing and his team began to march quickly again, with almost no time to rest. They crossed the rugged mountain roads, bypassed the frozen lake, and escaped along the untraveled trails. Every time they thought they had gotten rid of the Winter Claw's warriors behind them. In just half a day, there would be clouds approaching behind them. A winding rocky path. Huo Jixing stopped again and looked back. His red eyes reflected many clouds, and then his heart sank to the bottom of the lake. Spirit Fox Wanderer. He looked gloomy. In front of the clouds, the dim clouds belonging to the Spirit Fox Wanderer always followed them, and they could not get rid of them no matter what. Who? Who? Ox came over panting, his pale face becoming weaker. We probably can't get away, he said with a wry smile, but with your strength, there is still a chance to leave the Ironthorn Mountains. Huo Jixing remained silent, his red eyes looking at everyone, seeing that they were already panting and exhausted after a long march in the ice and snow environment. Compared to himself, they were just ordinary people with excellent physical fitness. No matter how excellent and elite they were, they could not quickly recover their consumed physical strength. And this rune weapon? Ox handed over the rune weapon in his hand that had been guarded by the sword boy Hainai. Take it with you. Huo Jixing looked down at the rune weapon that looked like a machete, and said softly, don't worry, they haven't caught up yet, we still have time. He seemed to want to comfort the Noxian scouts under his command, but he couldn't say the following words. Sometimes, the facts are too cruel. No matter how gorgeous the language is, it can't cover it up. Haha. Oaks laughed carelessly, and there was no fear of death on his pale face. Don't worry, we will buy you some time. In the rocky path, the deadly atmosphere fell on the team with the wind and snow. Huo Jixing held the hilt of the knife with his right hand, looking at the Noxian scouts who began to wipe the blade silently and tidy up their armor in front of him, and already knew their choice. Yes. Huo Jixing admitted that he had thought about retreating when he entered Fruljord. If it really came to the point where it was impossible, he would leave alone. After all, with his current strength and the ability brought by Suzaku Red Eyes and Fire Eyes, it is relatively easy to leave. But when he really faced it, he fell into a state of indecision. These Noxian scouts who were ready to stay and fight were his companions day and night, a group of living people. Not virtual characters in the game in his previous life. Century Captain, leave early before those winter bastards catch up. DeWitt came over, with a smile on his young face. Just like Moore, he knew his fate when he joined the Noxus warband. He died on horseback and returned home in glory. There is always a choice. You are different from us. Eric stood behind DeWitt, his tiger-like sturdy body with different scars, but it also made him more wild. What's the difference? Huo Jixing laughed softly and looked back at the dark night in the distance. The blizzard was sparse, and the thick snow was mixed with grey mountain roads. This rocky path was not far from the Ironthorn Mountains. After all, you have to make a choice. Huo Jixing looked at the rolling mountains in the distance, which were a little hazy and unreal, and a little out of reach. However, just looking at it, Huo Jixing's expression changed a little. Clouds. To the south of the Ironthorn Mountains, in the direction of the border of the Noxus Empire, he saw many clouds rising, and there were many of them. There were about twice as many as the pursuers of the Winter Claw, more than 100 people. Huo Jixing took a deep breath, and the red light in his eyes became more and more intense. He seemed to want to cross the distance of space to see the true face under the clouds. But unfortunately, he could only see those misty clouds. First of all, it must not be the clan warriors sent by the Winter Claw tribe again. Huo Jixing thought to himself. For the Noxian scout team that went deep into the depths alone, Sejuani would not be so crazy to send so many people to chase them. The pursuers behind him were all the forces that the Winter Claw tribe could allocate. Then in this land of the Iron Thorn Mountains, in addition to the Winter Claw tribe, there is only one force. Noxus Empire. The most important thing is that with Huo Jixing's best efforts, he saw a raging and arrogant cloud shadow from the many clouds behind him. It's really familiar. Huo Jixing grinned, and a bloody smile climbed on his face. He had made a decision. Shalyuba, find a terrain that is easy to defend and difficult to attack, and prepare for battle. Huo Jixing's order, like a stone thrown into the lake, instantly caused ripples in the Noxian scout team. Everyone looked at the upright figure with his right hand holding the hilt of the knife. What are you doing? We don't have much time left. Huo Jixing looked at Xiaoluba not far away and scolded. Yes. Xiaoluba immediately turned around and stepped into the snow. Huo Jixing looked around at the Noxian scouts who stood up, and said in a serious voice, "A trapped beast will still fight, let alone a human. Tonight, let's teach those winter bastards a good lesson." The dusk glow was diffused in the dark sky, covering the falling snow with a layer of golden battle clothes. Georgie Giant Fist rode on the Juvisk wild boar and stopped at the foot of a snowy hillside, looking up at the Noxian scouts who were waiting in battle above. "Are you welcoming your own death?" The slope of the hillside was not low, surrounded by cliffs, and only the smooth mountain road covered with snow in front could be walked up. It's just the grave they chose themselves. Frostfang Shaman Hikaru, wearing a dark blue robe, gently stroked the Frostfang giant wolf under his crotch. "Use arrows to consume them first." "No, the slope is not low, and arrows are not very effective." Georgie Great Fist jumped down from the Juvisk boar and looked at the Noxian scout with indifference. "Quick battle and quick decision. The Great War Mother Sejuani is still waiting for our report." Chapter 66. The cold wind is biting and the snowflakes are gradually slowing down. Many giant gravels were piled up on the treated hillside, and bonfires were burning around them to drive away the biting cold. Each Noxian scout stood there with a cold look on his face, the sharp blades in his hands glowing with cold light, reflecting the flickering fireworks. Shield Guard Hig stood at the front. As a Tauren, he is huge, and with the steel shield erected in front of him, he can block most long-range attacks. Behind them were Sheriba, Eric, DeWitt, Korda and others, silently waiting for orders. Blood Warrior. Oaks looked at the Winter Claw warriors gathered at the foot of the hillside and spoke in a solemn voice. Wearing hard leather armor and a felt hat, he holds a variety of bone blade weapons in his hands. They are veterans of the Winter's Claw, the most seasoned warriors and hunters on the Freljord. Fox Wanderer. When Oaks saw the young clan warrior in front of the Winter's Claw team, he instantly recognized the other person's identity. After all, they had just fought against each other not long ago. But when he saw another figure wearing a dark blue robe, his expression suddenly became serious. Frostfang Shaman. The middle-aged man in the field of vision has a neutral complexion, is smeared with blue marks, and is wearing a dark blue robe. Huo Jixing heard Oak's voice and looked over immediately. In front of the team of Winter's Claw, they saw Frostfang Shaman Hikaru, and 4 Frostfang giant wolves wandering beside him. Including the one being ridden by the other party, there were a total of 5 Frostfang giant wolves. These natural predators of the Freljord were like obedient babies, surrounding the Frostfang Shaman. Sure enough, this is not something that a beast spirit apprentice can compare to. Huo Jixing thought to himself. A well-trained Frostfang Shaman could control 5 giant Frostfang wolves, and his body shape and strength were significantly larger. Perhaps sensing Huo Jixing's gaze, he followed his gaze and looked over, with an unexplainable smile on his face. Iceborne. Oaks looked past the Frostfang Shaman and saw the tall man riding a Juvisk wild boar in the center, his eyes filled with confusion. The other person was not wearing a heavy fur coat, his arms were bare, and they were covered with indigo tattoos. Moreover, it can be seen from the position of the pursuers' team that the Spirit Fox Wanderer and Frostfang Shaman are led by tall men. In the Winter's Claw tribe, this represents the Iceborne warrior, who is the leader of the team and the most powerful. Be careful, that guy is not simple. Huo Jixing nodded slightly. Under the observation of Suzaku Red Eyes and Fire Eyes, the tall man riding the Juvisk wild boar looked the most majestic. Seeing the tall man jumping off the back of the Juvisk wild boar, the team of Winter's Claw pursuers began to change slowly. It's about to begin. Huo Jixing whispered softly. Then he tightly grasped the blue sword in his hand, and the rune weapon bloomed with brilliant brilliance. Earlier, Huo Jixing asked the sword boy Hainai about the effect of rune weapons, and the answer he got was sharp, strong, and seriously damaging. The sharpness and sturdiness are inherent in the rune weapons themselves, while serious injuries are due to the special rune effects. 3 very simple attributes, but perfectly suited to war. Huo Jixing reached out and brushed the blade. When he saw the blue runes flashing on it, he suddenly thought of a familiar sentence. See the real courage. At the bottom of the hillside, the sparse snow curtain cannot hide the eyes that choose people to eat. In front of the Winter's Claw team, the tall figure of Georgie Big Fist stood at the front of the team like a white jade pillar holding up the sky. He moved his body slightly and began to walk slowly towards the hillside. Behind him were the assembled blood warriors and the giant frost fang wolves that shook their heads and bared their teeth. Ice is in our blood. Frost Fang Shaman Hikaru pointed at the Noxian scout at the top of the hillside and roared loudly. Destroy them! Boom! A fiery atmosphere burst out over the mountain road, and roars exploded. Under the snowflakes all over the sky, a famous blood warrior looked ferocious, singing a tribal war song loudly, following in the footsteps of Georgie Jufist, charging towards the hillside. However, the terrain on the hillside is too dangerous. The higher you go up, the higher the slope and the narrower the terrain. When they reached the top, only Georgie and 4 blood warriors were left, as well as the Frost Fang giant wolf climbing along the cliff. The top of the hillside. The rumbling footsteps shook the hillside, and the snowflakes seemed to fall uncontrollably. Sheraba, a Noxian veteran and deputy of the scout team, took over the command of the team. He stared at the charging blood warriors and Georgie Big Fist at the front. Haig! Seeing the enemy approaching, Shalyuba immediately roared. He stared at the shirtless Georgie Big Fist in the front, hoping that the shield guard Haig could withstand the first wave of attacks from the Winter's Claw with the talent of the Tauren. But in the next moment, a look of horror appeared on Xiarupa's face. Not only Sheraba, but also Eric and everyone behind Haig witnessed the suffocating and terrifying scene in front of them. Boom! One punch. Just one punch. The hard shield held by the Tauren Haga was directly shattered, and the special stainless steel armor he wore was also covered with cracks. Then the strong and huge body rose into the air and landed heavily on the snow, dying. Under the snow and wind, among the broken shields, Georgie's tall figure appeared in everyone's sight, like a mountain, pressing everyone to the point of suffocation. The extraordinary power of the Iceborne. The overwhelming and terrifying advantage. Everything that Xialuba had carefully arranged was easily pierced through by Georgie's giant fist like paper. Looking at the array that suddenly became chaotic, Huo Jixing's expression suddenly changed, and he immediately stepped forward. The rune weapon in his hand instantly covered the fire of Nanli, and slashed at Georgie, who was about to continue. Swish! Hearing the harsh wind, Georgie turned his head and looked at Huo Jixing, his cold eyes revealing a proud fighting spirit. Stepping, swinging his fist. The huge fist with the Zhenbing boxing gloves left a trace of frost in the air, accurately hitting the rune weapon slashed by Huo Jixing. Clang! The dull sound of collision sounded. The blade and the boxing gloves only stalemate for a while. Huo Jixing was like being hit by a truck, and the terrifying impact force pushed him back. Even though his steps continued to crush the snow, he didn't release the terrifying power brought by the giant fist until he was 7 or 8 meters away. He looked at Georgie in front of him with an extremely solemn expression, and his arms holding the rune weapon trembled unconsciously. This guy's strength is definitely more than 5 points. After awakening Lu Su, his physical fitness has been comprehensively improved again, which is why he can repel the spirit fox wanderer. But facing Georgie in front of him, he was completely suppressed. No wonder the Minotaur Hegi couldn't withstand the opponent's punch. Kill! Huo Jixing looked decisive, holding the knife with both hands, turned into a flame shadow, and rushed forward again. The blazing Nanli fire burned fiercely, covering his whole body, and the rune weapon in his hand also glowed. On this battlefield, only he could stop Georgie's forward steps. Clang! 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 The dancing blades, like fire elves, surrounded Georgie. Since his power was suppressed, Huo Jixing relied on his agility and skills to find fatal flaws. But he obviously underestimated the Iceborne in front of him. He was given the title of Giant Fist by the War Mother Sejuani. Georgie's skills were not low. He used the true Ice Fist to protect the vital parts of his body, making Huo Jixing's attack ineffective. And his own casual punch forced Huo Jixing to stop the attack and had to defend. The red-gold flames became more and more violent, but they could not melt the true Ice Fist that was as solid as a rock. Clang! Under the heavy punch, Huo Jixing immediately retreated and rolled on the ground to avoid it, removing the terrifying power from the rune weapon. Just as he stood up, he saw that there were 4 frost-fanged giant wolves around him, and he didn't know when they had been around. They opened their huge mouths, saliva dripped onto the snow, and roared frequently, as if they were ready to pounce and bite vital parts at any time. "Get out of my way!" Huo Jixing roared, and the Nanli fire on his body raged, like a raging fire that shot up into the sky, burning and twisting the air. Suzaku Frenzy Dance. His wrist turned, like an afterimage, driving the rune weapon, leaving dense red knife lights in the air. Visibly, Huo Jixing's face was sunken and his muscles were contracting, but the Nanli fire surging in his body reached its peak. At this moment, the red-gold Nanli fire turned the top of the hillside into a sea of flames, boiling and scorching. And under this almost terrifying wave of flames, the brave offensive from the Winter Claw came to an abrupt end. The Blood Warriors left behind 7 or 8 charred remains of their companions, and the Frost-Fang giant wolf also left behind a wolf corpse with its body torn apart and fled in a panic. They huddled in the distance, staring at Huo Jixing with their blue eyes, howling with hatred. Chapter 67. The top of the hillside. The broken bonfire and the raging Nanli fire intertwined to create a wall of orange flames, preventing the Winter's Claw from continuing to attack. Huo Jixing gasped, clenched the rune weapon in his hand, and looked at the tall figure behind the wall of flames, with a hint of fear in his red eyes. He had to explode his strength in advance. Facing the full attack of Winter's Claw, they seemed like a lonely boat in the huge waves, in danger of capsizing at any time. Not only were they in trouble, Sharuba and the others were also struggling to resist the fanatical offensive of the Blood Warriors. If they cannot temporarily repel the continuous offensive of Winter's Claw, they may not be able to wait for reinforcements from behind and will be submerged in the wave of Winter's Claw's offensive. Boom! A huge punch sounded. When Huo Jixing heard the sound, he saw a ferocious fist mark emerging from the raging wave of flames. 1 punch. 2 punches. 3 punches. The giant fist wrapped in frost penetrated the wall of flames like a cannonball. Then Georgie stepped in, the blue frost covering his body blocking the erosion of Nanli fire. He walked slowly to Huo Jixing, a hint of sarcasm appearing on his cold face. "I don't know why you stayed, but you obviously have something to rely on. Do you have support? Or are you confident in your own strength? But unfortunately, I won't give you another chance." Huo Jixing arched his waist, moved his right foot back, and held the rune weapon in front of him, facing the approaching Georgie. Although they are both iceborn, this guy is much more powerful than Balorik the Tooth Crow. Maybe with a few punches, Balorik can be crushed head-on. Bang! The terrifying fist struck again, and the Zhenbing gloves glowed with brilliant blue light. Huo Jixing's eyes narrowed, and his steps moved like a butterfly, shuttling through the diffuse blue frost. He slashed at the hard fist with the dense sword light like snowflakes. Sonoras! 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 After a while, the dull sound of fighting echoed over the hillside. The lighting of Lyasua's star gave Huo Jixing the skill of conquering blade. Now, he began to show off his extremely improved sword skills with all his strength, hoping to kill the ice warrior in front of him. Looking towards the top of the hillside, red gold fireworks burst out, and the biting frost raged. The terrifying energy fluctuations gradually intertwined into a red and blue storm under the wind and snow, squeezing the wall of scorching flames. The Blood Warriors who retreated looked at the array where the fire was fading, roared again, rushed towards the Noxian scouts, and launched wave after wave of fierce attacks. Huo Jixing, however, had no time to think about anything else and was doing his best to display his skills. However, the pressure brought by Georgie Jufist was too great, and every punch he threw was filled with biting frost, compressing his movement space. In addition, there are also a pack of giant frost fang wolves on the side, as well as a spirit fox wanderer standing on the smooth mountain wall, waiting for an opportunity to move. A guy with extraordinary talent. At the bottom of the hillside, Frostfang Shaman Hikaru looked up at the battle above with an astonished expression. He never expected that he would encounter such a gifted extraordinary person in this pursuit. The Noxus Empire is so willing to give up. He sighed softly, and understood why the Teeth Crow clan failed. Along with his own leader, Balorik the Tooth Crow was also completely defeated. Hikaru rode the frost-toothed giant wolf down and slowly climbed up the steep hillside. He just glanced at Zyluba and the others casually, and then focused all his attention on Huo Jixing, who turned into flames. However, it is such a gifted person who can please the Great War Mother Sejuani. Hikaru stretched out his right hand, pointed his index finger at the moving Huo Jixing, and a touch of blue frost filled his eyes. Wild secret technique Frost Fang Furious Spirit. Roar. A deafening howl of wolves suddenly sounded on the hillside. In front of Hikaru, I saw waves of transparent ripples appearing like water ripples, suppressing the fiercely burning wall of flames, turning into a blue wolf shape, and rushing towards Huo Jixing. Almost at the moment when the wolf howled, Huo Jixing's eyes narrowed and he saw the blue wolf shape coming towards Georgie from behind. Suzaku Nanli Fire. The rune weapons rotated around the body, and the blazing fire of Nanli boiled. Huo Jixing tried his best to dodge, but the Frost Fang giant wolves and the Spirit Fox Wanderers, who sensed an opportunity, rushed towards him through the snow like arrows. Stab! Click! Blood splattered and armor shattered. Huo Jixing staggered and almost fell to the snow, but with his desperate actions, he barely managed to repel the attacking Frost Fang wolves and the Spirit Fox Wanderer. But dense claw marks and ferocious knife wounds appeared on the waist, abdomen, and back, and the biting frost invaded the body along the wounds. Whoops! Whoops! He looked at the retreating Frost Fang giant wolf and the ferocious-looking Spirit Fox Wanderer, panting violently, and the hazy white steam covered his shriveled face. It seems that they are underestimating the strength of these pursuers. Huo Jixing lowered his head and looked at the rune weapon in his hand. Under the continuous attack, several cracks had appeared on the blade. Especially Georgie's giant fist, after several blows, the rune weapon became obviously distorted. He looked at Georgie who was about to attack again, suppressed his timidity, and faced him again. Now, his flesh and blood have long been ablaze, and he no longer cares about the so-called threshold, he just wants to stop the many enemies in front of him. Facing the many extraordinary beings of Winter's Claw, the once sturdy body turned into flesh and firewood, igniting the increasingly vigorous red-gold Nanli fire. He was risking his life. He was racing against time. In a daze, Huo Jixing seemed to see a hint of deep red in the mountains not far away, and then he grinned, placed the rune weapon in front of him, and swung out the last desperate blow. Suzaku red eyes and fire pupils. Suzaku Nanli fire. Under the red eyes, time seemed to stop. The dancing snowflakes solidified in the air, and the Zhenbing boxing gloves wrapped around the huge fist trembled. The Frost Fang giant wolf, which was about to pounce, lifted its limbs off the ground and jumped into the air, with its fangs and huge mouth opened, as if it was going to choose someone to devour. The Spirit Fox Wanderer also approached, his face painted with blue marks was full of cruelty, and the ice dagger in his hand, with a piercing cold, slashed directly at Huo Jixing's neck. At this moment, when all the scenes came alive again, what greeted them was no longer Huo Jixing who was struggling to support, but a figure that turned into a torch. Suzaku cry. Huo Jixing took a long breath, his shriveled face sunken again, the flesh and blood on his body melted rapidly, and the Nanli fire covering his body became more and more vigorous. Strength comes from the feet. At this moment, Huo Jixing used all his strength to transfer the power to the rune weapon through rotation and swinging, instantly cutting through the air and making a sound like a bird's cry. Tick! 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 The next moment, above the hillside, dazzling and luxurious sword lights, wrapped in dancing snowflakes, enveloped everyone like a sudden snowstorm. At the same time, thousands of bird calls gathered. Finally, they merged together and turned into a bright and high-pitched call of the vermilion bird. Clang! Faintly, the vermilion bird cried. It seemed that there was a noble and majestic red figure, reflecting the sky, and the feathers in the sky were like fire and clouds, blazing and fierce. Chapter 68. The dark sky was covered with pale snowflakes, but they could not suppress the fierceness of the battlefield on the hillside. And in this endless battle, accompanied by the cry of the vermilion bird, a series of brilliant and luxurious red sword lights, like meteors, carrying the red-gold fire of Nanli, instantly submerged all the enemies on the hillside. Bang! Under the dull thunder-like slashing sound, Georgie staggered and fell from the top of the hillside. Blood marks appeared on his broad shoulders and waist, and his bare arms were also stained with blood. His fists couldn't help but tremble slightly. Incredible skills! Georgie ignored the scars on his body, his cold and ruthless eyes glowed, and he stared at the gradually extinguished fireworks at the top of the hillside. It's really amazing. Frost Fang Shaman Hikaru beside him had a gloomy face. He was originally at the outermost edge and avoided the desperate counterattack without any danger. But under the attack of the flames just now, 4 of the 5 frost-fang giant wolves he brought with him had died, and their bodies were separated. The ferocious wolf heads rolled in the snow, and the mixed cold snowflakes watered the bloody marks. However, the worst among them was the spirit fox wanderer Lear. Not only did his fox partner suffer a serious injury, but now he also lost his left arm. He fell to the side in the snow, panting violently, and his eyes were filled with fear. This should be his last counterattack. Georgie laughed softly. Just as he moved his arms and prepared to rush up again, he ended up killing Huo Jixing. He suddenly heard a rumbling sound from a distance. The snowflakes covering the mountain road trembled, like dust, floating off the ground. Perhaps because of fear, the dim sky also sprinkled a little starlight, illuminating the hills. Frost Fang Shaman Hikaru was the first to react. He immediately turned his head to look at the road he came from, and his expression instantly became embarrassed. In his vision, a crimson wave came from far away, like a war monster, destroying all obstacles along the way. Naku's blood cavalry. Hikaru said word by word. Georgie stopped and stared at the crimson wave coming from afar, his expression extremely gloomy. In the current situation, he faced 2 choices. One is to organize an offensive immediately, rush to the top of the hillside, and eliminate the Naku scouts who have lost the ability to resist. But they will lose the time to form a formation, causing them to face the ruthless charge of the Naku's blood cavalry directly. The second is to gather all the blood warriors, be ready to fight against the Naku's blood cavalry rushing from a distance. With their current strength, it is possible to defeat the opponent head-on. Hikaru, Lear, prepare for battle. After hesitating for a while, Georgie made a decision immediately. The Naku scouts at the top of the hillside have lost their combat capability. Once they defeated the Noxian blood cavalry that came to help, the other side would still be lambs to be slaughtered. Then, Georgie walked towards the Juvisk boar, climbed on its back, and rode to the front of the team. Iron Thorn, it's time to eat. This giant beast with fangs opened its bloody mouth, stepped heavily on the ground with one hoof, and exhaled a thick frost. However, with the approach of the Noxian blood cavalry, this Juvisk boar named Ironthorn began to get inexplicably irritated, and even trembled unconsciously. On the towering cliffs, endless snowflakes slowly fell on the crimson armor. A very good Noxian newcomer. At the front of the cavalry team, Kled stood on the back of the desert dragon lizard without any image, looking at the battle on the distant hillside. In the cold environment, the raging and burning Nenli fire also made him feel a little frightened. Unfortunately, the user was too weak, otherwise the extraordinary people of the Winter Claw tribe would not have attacked the hillside so easily. We should take action. Wilson, the Legion advisor, stared at the shaky and thin figure, and seemed a little anxious, and couldn't help but speak. They can't hold on. Haha, don't worry. Kled laughed loudly, and the sharp axe in his hand hit the head of the desert dragon lizard scare, causing a low roar. It's time to let these Winter Claw bastards see the tenacity of Noxian people. It's not just them who can survive in the frozen soil of the north, we can too. Time passes, but it is always tormenting for those who wait. Wilson looked at the battle not far away with a nervous look. Seeing that people kept falling down and could no longer get up, he became more and more anxious. He didn't expect to accidentally meet Huo Jixing and Eric and his group on the route he chose this time. But he had no way to deal with the situation in front of him. Kled was the commander of the team. Until a loud and bright bird cry sounded, and the violent and brilliant flames suppressed the wind and snow. Incredible skills! Cray exclaimed. Wilson, your eyes are as sharp as ever. Before Wilson could speak, Cray stepped on the head of the desert dragon lizard, walked to the front of the team, and looked at the silent heavy cavalry in front of him. Noxian blood cavalry. This is the real elite cavalry of the Noxian Empire, and it is the veterans who have participated in this battle selected by Cray personally. They are dressed in crimson heavy armor and ride armored war horses. Under the helmet and visor of each person, there seemed to be no emotion in their calm and dead eyes. They held the heavy lances in both hands, with sharp cold light. Even though they passed through Noxtura continuously, from the southeastern island of the Empire to the northern border of the Empire, they did not show any fatigue. Little guys, let's tell the bastards of Winter Claw. Nakus is unstoppable. Cray waved the sharp axe in his hand, pointing to the hills not far away, and could no longer resist the desire to kill in his heart, and roared. It seemed that the enemy was a little weak, and the desert dragon lizard scare was no longer timid, shaking his ears, waiting for Kray's order. Attack! With Kray's order, the snow began to tremble. The crimson wave pouring down was like a flood that was opened, rolling in and destroying all obstacles along the way. They held up their sharp heavy lances, clamped them tightly with their arms and waists, smashed the sparse snow curtain, and aimed straight at the enemy not far away. The top of the messy hillside. The blazing Nanli fire melted the ice and snow, revealing a dry mountain with charred corpses randomly placed around. In the center of the fire, Huo Jixing could no longer hold on and fell to the ground. Looking closely, he looked very miserable after overusing the Nanli fire. His handsome face was gone, like a layer of skin hanging on his almost skull-like cheeks. Along the cracks in the broken armor, you can see that the once sturdy body is gone, looking skinny, with a layer of skin and bones covering the body. The Nanli fire covering the body has long been extinguished, and the rune weapon in his hand looks broken. Goo-goo! Goo-goo! At this moment, an almost crazy feeling of hunger and thirst came. Even Huo Jixing, who had been tortured once, could not bear it at all. He climbed to the corner of the hillside in a very embarrassed manner and used the rune weapon to dig out the spoils that had been buried long ago. The pile of dry and hard bacon, and some cooked animal meat. Huo Jixing grabbed it directly with his hands, stuffed it into his mouth, swallowed it directly without chewing, and let the Nanli fire in his body decompose it. Looking at the water bag next to the food. The hungry and thirsty Huo Jixing twisted the lid and lay on the ground like a person dying of thirst, drinking cold snow water in big mouthfuls. The instantaneous cold stimulation made Huo Jixing feel as if he was alive again. But the hunger and thirst remained, and he had to continue swallowing food and meat to maintain the energy consumption in his body. He stopped his terrifying eating speed until there were bursts of roaring sounds in his ears. Huo! Huo! Huo Jixing got up panting, and without time to check the situation of others, he staggered to the edge of the hillside. Seeing the crimson waves surging in the distance, he couldn't help but laugh. It seems that my bet was right, and fate favors me again. Chapter 69. The night is dark and the wind and snow are miserable. The sparse snow curtain could not hide the crimson waves surging in the distance. Georgie seemed to sense the uneasiness of stepping down from the Juvisk wild boar. He forcibly grabbed the reins and reached out to comfort his companion. From what he could see, the number of Noxian Scarlet Cavalry far exceeded his own team. But tempered by the cruel and ruthless environment of the Freljord, they are natural warriors who are never afraid of any challenge. Looking at the approaching Noxian Scarlet Cavalry, Georgie took a deep breath and stood in the middle of the mountain road riding a Juvisk wild boar. For Winter's Claw, for the Great War Mother Sejuani. He raised his arms and roared loudly, intending to lead the blood warriors who were ready to block the surging crimson wave. Fighting! Whoosh! 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 Under the dark sky, barbed arrows fell like sudden rain, tearing apart the snow curtain and falling towards the oncoming bloody cavalry of Noxus. But when the arrows fall, they seem to encounter invisible obstacles and most of them lose their direction. Those who occasionally fall into the cavalry array will not be able to cause any effective damage. Seeing this, Georgie immediately waved his hand, signaling the blood warrior behind him to stand at the front of the array with a shield in hand. The narrow mountain road not only hindered their previous attack, but also restricted the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry that came to the rescue. Georgie looked at the surging bloody wave. Although the leader could not be seen clearly, they were able to walk side by side on the mountain road without any hindrance. There were only 5 Noxian Scarlet Cavalry. He clenched his fists and awakened the ice blood in his body. Dark blue frost gradually filled his body, and the ice weapons wrapped around his hands were also trembling. Maybe the temperature is too low. The dark blue frost condensed the air and compressed inside, as if it was turning into a rock-solid ice wall. The Juvisk wild boar that Georgie stepped under was also a little unbearable. Its thick front hooves frequently trampled the snow, and its tusks swung with its head and cut through the air. Bend over and make a fist. Georgie was ready to use the ice power he had accumulated for a long time to crush the blood-colored wave rolling in at the front. Boom! 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 The sound of horse hooves trampling in unison was like thunder, resounding through the mountain road. Georgie's cold eyes crossed the snow curtain and saw the person at the front of the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry. A Yordle? Doubts arose in my heart, but the next moment, a look of panic and fear appeared on Georgie's resolute face. The Yordle riding a desert dragon lizard and wielding a sharp blade reminded him of a Noxian hero who was active in rumors and biographies. Furious Knight Kled. He wanted to open his mouth and shout loudly to disperse the bloody warriors in formation. But before any action can be taken, the bloody wave has arrived. He could only swing his fist in a hurry, and the dark blue frost turned into frost mist under the blessing of Zhenbing gloves, blocking him in front. Scar. At the forefront of the crimson wave, Kled was originally walking alongside the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry. But the moment he saw the dark blue frost mist, he immediately tightened the reins, and cold murderous intent surged out of his only intact eye. The desert dragon lizard immediately accelerated, took quick steps, and led Kled forward. Bang! The terrifying crashing sound resounded throughout the battlefield. The desert dragon lizard ignored the surrounding frost and swung its scaly tail, directly hitting the Juvisk wild boar like a car, and Georgie, who was sitting upright on his back, could not avoid it. The unstoppable force first broke the sharp tusks of the Juvisk wild boar, then shattered Georgie's arm and threw him into the air. The bone-crushing pain attacked Georgie's nerves. He watched himself rising from the ground, recalling the previous scene when he knocked away the enemy. So this is what it feels like. Then, he saw Kled grinning, swung the silver axe in his hand, and slashed down. Click! The axe blade fell, the condensed frost shattered, and then passed across his neck. Darkness fell instantly, completely engulfing Georgie's consciousness. At this moment, the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry surged like a torrent through Kled's torn mouth, breaking through the Blood Warrior's defense with overwhelming force. Kill them all! Kled raised his axe high, and the dripping blood stained his armor and Scar's scaly body red. Behind him, the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry looked cold, straightening the heavy lance in his hand, like a black spike, piercing into the Blood Warrior's body. Those hard shields and heavy robes and armor were as easy to penetrate as paper in front of the sharp heavy lance. Just a moment. The sticky blood was like a heavy rain, pouring on the snow, and each hot body was trampled by the bloody Noxian cavalry. Scar, who became active, seemed to be out of control. He led Kled and ran around in the chaotic array, causing a bloody storm. But this is not the end. After the first round of charge, the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry, led by Kled, quickly adjusted their formation. The front army becomes the rear army, and the rear army becomes the front army. Only Kled is still ahead. For Noxus. Kled spat out the blood foam in his mouth, pointed his axe at the remaining blood warriors, and launched another fatal charge. In the bloody battlefield, the remaining claws of Winter Blood Warriors completely lost their fighting spirit when faced with the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry led by Kled. They screamed in terror and ran around, but they could not get rid of the Noxian Blood Cavalry that surrounded them. The bright moonlight hid behind the grey clouds, and the dim starlight fell to the ground. This massacre belonging to the Noxians is over. This pale hill has been completely dyed red by sticky blood. From a distance, broken corpses, broken weapons, and a huge Juvisk wild boar were thrown away casually like unwanted garbage. The bloody blood gathered into a stream, carrying snowflakes, and flowed along the mountain road. Huo Jixing looked down at the scene in front of him that looked like a scarlet hell, with a look of astonishment, as if he did not expect that the blood warriors who besieged him would be completely destroyed. Ta-ta! Ta-ta! Hearing the crisp footsteps, Huo Jixing looked up and saw a familiar figure in his sight. Wilson. He looked at the middle-aged man who walked to the top of the hillside and was protected by the Noxian Blood Cavalry, and spoke in surprise. The middle-aged man in red and grey robes in front of him was the Legion advisor he met in the military camp. Long time no see. Wilson walked closer, looked at the skinny Huo Jixing, and said the reason for their unexpected meeting with a heavy expression. At this time, he had seen the tragic battlefield at the top of the hillside. Except for Huo Jixing, there were only a few Noxian scouts left, most of whom turned into cold corpses, lying quietly on the dry ground. Huo Jixing licked the corners of his dry mouth, his expression was silent. He dragged his weak body past Wilson and looked at the scattered Noxian Blood Cavalry, looking for and healing the surviving Noxian scouts. Chapter 70. The biting cold wind blew over the hills, waving the blood-stained robes. Huo Jixing saw the Minotaur Hague, lying quietly on the ground, his horns broken, his special steel armor shattered, his chest completely collapsed, and he could see the white bones. The Noxian veteran Shalyuba leaned against the mountain wall, his resolute face still had anger, even though he had lost his breath of life, but his body, like a pine tree, was still straight. Rand, the Noxian scout who was once as strong as a wolf. Now he has lost both arms and his neck is broken, lying on the bloody ground like a broken toy. And the War Mason Oaks, his weather-beaten face is covered with scars, but he is like a rock, standing in front of the sword boy Hainai until death comes. Eric. Looking at the tall figure slumped on the ground not far away, Huo Jixing's eyes paused, and a touch of disbelief and sadness appeared on his bloodless face. The tiger-like body that once brought a sense of security was covered with hideous scars. There was still a roar to the god of death on his rough face, but at this moment, he was like a bloody sculpture, unable to move. Behind Eric was Devitt. This young Noxian scout was receiving treatment from the Noxian blood cavalry, with bandages wrapped around his arms and waist, soaked in blood. Is this the true face of war? Huo Jixing supported his body with rune weapons, like a dead vine and old tree, standing there blankly, looking at everything in front of him absent-mindedly. Vaguely, he seemed to be back in the Noxian camp. Recalling the scene when he first met everyone in the three-story building. The shock brought by the tall body of the Tauren Hague, the vicissitudes and sophistication of the Noxian veteran Shalyuba, the unruly Rand, and the familiar faces of others. Death and pain are the melody of war. Wilson walked to Huo Jixing's side and whispered to comfort him. They sacrificed their lives for the victory of Noxus. The Empire will not forget them. He looked at the body of his old friend Eric, and a little sadness surged in his heart. But he quickly suppressed his emotions, knowing that the war was far from over. Bang! A dull sound sounded beside him. Huo Jixing and Wilson turned around and saw two broken bodies falling from the air and thrown in front of them. Huo Jixing instantly recognized their identities. It was the spirit fox wanderer Lahar and the Frostfang shaman Hikaru. The two people who were just majestic and waiting for an opportunity to attack had completely lost their breath of life, their necks were broken, and their heads were hanging crookedly on their bodies. Ta-ta! 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 Just as Huo Jixing was surprised, a tiny sound came from the bottom of the hillside. But in a moment, a desert dragon lizard covered with hard scales appeared in the field of vision, with two thick hind legs standing on the dry ground, and ears like cattail leaves hanging on both sides of its head. It first stretched out its head and carefully observed the situation on the top of the hillside. After seeing Huo Jixing and Wilson, it turned its dark pupils and looked around curiously. Boy, look at these two dirty guys, are they the extraordinary people who attacked you? The furious Nightcray stretched out his right hand and pressed it on the top of Skur's green head, holding the reins tightly, and walked in front of Huo Jixing. He lowered his head slightly and looked down at Huo Jixing. The corners of his cracked mouth tore out a graceful arc, and his sharp teeth were like a beast showing its proud posture. They run quite fast, but their speed is not as fast as Skur. Gililililu. As if he understood Kray's praise, Skur raised his head, opened his copper bell-like eyes, and looked around at everyone. Yes, Lord Kled. Huo Jixing walked past the bodies of Lahar and Hikaru, walked in front of the desert dragon lizard Skur, and saluted Kled. He saw that Kled was specifically hunting down these two Winter Claw superhumans. The Frostfang shaman was still okay. Under the pressure of the desert dragon lizard, the Frostfang giant wolf was no longer as fierce as before and could not outrun Skur at all. But the spirit fox wanderer was an agility superhuman. If he was determined to escape, it would take some time to catch up with him. Boy, you are quite strong. Kled rode Skur to Huo Jixing, looked at his skinny body, and invited him. Are you interested in joining my army? I am Colonel Kled. No, General Kled. Huo Jixing was stunned. The invitation in front of him was a bit unexpected. He didn't know how to answer. Just as he was hesitating, Wilson beside him spoke at the right time. Lord Kray, he is already General Darius's man, it is a bit against the rules for you to do this. Rules? What rules? Kray said nonchalantly. In the Noxian Legion, I, Kray, am the rule. Then I hope you can say the same when you meet General Darius. Wilson said softly, and then stood beside Kray with his hands folded. Kray's only remaining eye turned, first looking at Huo Jixing, and then at Wilson. Then he swung his axe and shouted at the Noxian blood cavalry at the bottom of the hill. Move, quickly deal with the battlefield, we are ready to leave. Looking at Kray's current situation, he did not mention the matter of recruiting Huo Jixing just now. Lord Kray, have you seen their weapons? Seeing that Kled had lost interest, Huo Jixing gently stepped on the heads of the Frostfang shaman and the Fox Wanderer, fiddling with their bodies, but he didn't see the weapons they had just used in the battle. Oh, you mean their true ice weapons? Kled asked in confusion. In his impression, only the warriors of the Iceborne could endure the bone-chilling cold of true ice and use it on the battlefield. Seeing Huo Jixing nod, he scratched his head, I don't care, you can go find it. But we have to hurry up, we need to get to the Winterthorn Mountain Road as soon as possible, Darius is still waiting for my rescue. Cled patted Scar's head, as if he wanted to save some face and made a joke about Darius. Okay. Huo Jixing nodded quickly, dragged his body that had recovered a little, and walked down the hillside. Whoosh! 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 The cold wind whistled, and the strong smell of blood filled the nose. Huo Jixing looked at the corpses that covered the mountain road, which were placed there in a mess. Noxian blood cavalry were executing the surviving blood warriors in an orderly manner and collecting some spoils. Walking along the bloody ground, he first found the true ice gloves on the broken corpse beside the Juvisk boar. Then he crossed the battlefield and found the true ice dagger of the spirit fox wanderer and the blue rune necklace of the Frostfang shaman in the mountains and forests not far away. Tisk tisk, it feels good to have a big boss to take care of it. Huo Jixing looked at the two true ice weapons and rune items covered with weak Nanli fire in his hand, and sighed softly. Then, he thought of the sacrificed people behind this tragic battle, and slowly restrained his inner joy. Blood is the wine of victory, you will slowly get used to the taste of blood. Huo Jixing remembered what Devitt said, and gradually tasted some of the taste. Isn't the victory of the war soaked in blood? Chapter 71. The night of winter removed the veil of darkness under the light of dawn. The crimson glow glowed slightly in the sky at the junction of morning and evening, covering the falling snowflakes with a thin layer of clothing. Udur walked through the Winterthorn Mountain Road. The frozen river surface had long been stained red with blood, condensing the cold of the night. His footsteps left bloody marks on the snow-white ground. In the distance, the battlefield was still burning, and there was a curtain of black smoke, covering the scattered dawn light. But he still saw the figures moving inside. They were the blood warriors of the Winter Claw, who were cleaning the battlefield, searching for survivors and collecting spoils. Occasionally, some Noxian soldiers were seen being stabbed a few more times and left to be stained with blood. Near them, there were a few bear men, their skin was stained brown with blood, their hair was stuck together with dirt, and they looked like they were looking for food. Then the actions of these bear men told Udur. They were looking for food. According to the covenant between the Winter Claw tribe and the Undying Thunder Vala bear, those who died in the war would become food and sacrifices for the bears. The bears were dismembering the bodies of Noxian soldiers, using battle axes and claws to tear flesh and stuff them into their mouths. Perhaps they sensed Udur's gaze. They turned their beast-like faces and looked at Udur in the distance, provocatively stabbing another Winter Claw warrior with their claws, and then roared. In an instant, the nearby blood warriors quickly approached. They saw that the bodies of their companions were being destroyed, and looked at the bears with anger. But due to the order of the War Mother Sejuani, they could not do it. This is a scene that Udur saw, and it is also a scene that can be seen everywhere on the battlefield at this moment. In the battle last night, the bears broke through the defense line of the Noxian infantry regiment, and Sejuani's troops followed closely, but they underestimated the cruelty of the bears. Until now, Udur could still feel the unquestionable bear spirit that was cutting through the tendons and bones and creeping into the minds of every living being around him. The power of the bear people was growing, and the sound of thunder was gathering in the sky. Udur went around the mountain road and came to the camp built by the Winter Claw tribe specifically for the bear people. On the towering hill, he saw a huge bear-like creature. It was the biggest bear spirit monster. In the field of vision, the mountain-like bear spirit monster was standing alone in the center of the camp. He put the tops of the corpses one by one on the spikes to form some unknown pattern. Then black branches and roots grew on the corpses scattered around the monster, like worms drilled out of the ground. Thunder could be seen in the looming. There was also a huge bear spirit face. Volibear. Udur's heart sank. He saw that in the thunder, the flesh and fur on Volibear's face became lifelike, and its muscles seemed to become thicker and heavier than before. Volibear, sensing Udur's approach, was reviving. Under the sound of thunder, more than a dozen deep purple eyes emerged from the darkness, each as dark and cold as a spider's eyes, with a cruel color. Perhaps he smelled foreign magic in this Winter's Claw shaman, and now he has determined that he has passed the test. Somehow, Udur knew that this time it was Volibear who was speaking to him alone. I will be reborn, and you cannot stop me, child of man. Volibear's voice rang directly in Udur's consciousness. Udur endured the chaotic and unpredictable consciousness and slowly took off his cloak. After preparing for meditation in the evening, he walked through his different forms one by one, the immortal eagle, the agile mountain cat, the resolute wild boar, and more than a dozen other beast spirits. When he changed into the appearance of a bear spirit, he stopped, resisting the thunder power in his consciousness and perfectly controlling his body. "You can't take her away." Udur opened his eyes wide and spoke calmly to the bear spirit in front of him, which was like a mountain. The atmosphere of silence permeated. The huge bear monster looked deeply at Udur, then turned back to continue the bloody work in his hands. But the sky filled with the glow of dawn began to darken gradually. Thunder rumbled, and lightning streaked across the sky. The dark purple storm gathered, and between the lightning and thunder, dark clouds appeared out of thin air, as if to cover everything under its shadow. The Winterthorn Mountain Road, the frozen river on the shore. The trenches extending to the mountains were covered with snow. One after another, the solemn military buildings rose from the ground, turning the snow-white mountains into dark jungles. On the towering watchtower, Darius was wearing solid armor, and his red cloak fluttered in the biting cold wind. He looked at the battlefield covered with corpses and filled with blood, his expression gloomy. "Bear!" he roared. "Is Sejuani crazy? The god of the old ways will devour all life and become his slaves." Last night's confrontation was just the appetizer of this war. But the sudden appearance of the bears broke the balance between the two sides. Faced with the bears' life and death attack, the Noxian infantry regiment was directly defeated, leaving a pile of corpses on the ground and returned to the camp. "The immortal Thunder Volibear is coming back." Behind Darius, a middle-aged mage in a black robe spoke. "Our soldiers are becoming sacrifices." Hearing the fear in the middle-aged wizard's words, Darius suppressed his anger. Before launching the First Freljord War, the Empire began to collect news about the Winterclaw and other tribes, which also included many secret rumors. Undying Thunder Volibear is one of them. He existed long before mortals walked on the frozen tundra of Freljord. This land was created by him and his fellow gods, and it is something he wants to protect at all costs. But now, human civilization and the weakness that comes with it have made him resentful for a long time. He is returning to fight for the old customs and ancient ways. Sacrifice? Who will be the sacrifice in this war is still unknown. Darius looked ferocious. Suddenly, the sky of the distant mountains began to darken. Deafening thunder sounded, and lightning split the sky. A deep purple storm gathered, and between lightning and thunder, dark clouds appeared out of thin air, like a dark tide, slowly spreading. Has it started? Darius saw the abnormal changes in the Winterclaw tribe and immediately realized that the final decisive battle was about to begin. It seems that they have done a good job. Combined with the gathering storm in front of him, he thought of the many scouts sent to Freljord before the war began, and instantly connected the two. It seems that Sejuani is under more pressure than him. Darius turned around and looked at the towering watchtower behind him. Noxian soldiers in armor were walking around the camp. "Everyone, it's time to sacrifice for the Empire." Darius's dark eyes turned and fell on the many war group leaders in front of him. He smelled the burning breath. "For Noxus." The low roar, like the howl of a black wolf, was passionate and violent, but it was calm and spread to the many war group leaders behind him. It seemed that it awakened the already burning desire for war in the Noxians. "For Noxus! For Noxus!" The many war group leaders gathered in the watchtower looked at the tall figure in front of them wearing a red cloak and roared with fanaticism. Then they quickly left and returned to their own war groups to prepare for the upcoming decisive battle. Chapter 72. In the center of the camp, in front of a crimson felt tent, Darius looked at Captain Farron who was following him and said in a deep voice, "Ben, no one is allowed to approach here without my order." Hearing the voice, Captain Farron, who was wearing heavy armor, stopped and looked at the middle-aged mage in a black robe, and nodded slowly. "Follow your orders." Then Darius led the middle-aged mage beside him into his own felt tent. The crimson felt tent in front of him occupies a large area, half the size of a football field. It was specially built by Darius. Entering inside, the environment and decoration inside the tent are different from those of normal felt tents. The first thing that comes into view is the simple lounge. Near the edge of the tent is a heavy black desk, which is piled with many documents and letters. In front of the black desk is a large conference table with a pale sand table on it. Looking closely, it is the terrain of the Winterthorn Mountains. Next to this lounge is a specially built steel compartment. This is why the felt tent takes up so much space. Pushing open the steel door, a red light enveloped Darius's body, and then it seemed to have spirituality and extended to the black-robed mage. "General." In the steel compartment, a dashing woman wearing steel armor and long black hair saw Darius and spoke respectfully. Her palm was flashing with a rich green light, suppressing the red light in the compartment that was like boiling magma. Tyrannical fragments. The black-robed mage, who had been following Darius and remained silent, cried out in horror when he saw the broken rune in the center of the red light. Tyrannical fragments. One of the runes produced after the former world rune tyranny was broken. In the rune war thousands of years ago, except for a small number of world runes that were preserved. Most of the other world runes were destroyed in the endless war, turned into many fragments, and lost in various regions of the Valoran continent. The black-robed mage didn't expect to see the tyranny fragment here, and in the hands of his own general Darius. No, that's not right. The black-robed mage seemed to think of something, his eyes flickering. The tyranny fragment in front of him should be controlled by the imperial military, and Darius, as an imperial general, used it in this war. At the same time, the black-robed mage also recognized the extraordinary profession of the dashing woman in front of him. Rune Weaver. It is because of her existence that the tyranny fragment in front of him can exist quietly and coexist with the crimson hideous armor. Research on runes has long begun within the Noxus Empire. Rune weavers are extraordinary people born for this reason. They are born to be able to touch runes, and have an unimaginable understanding of runes. Darius glanced at the rune weaver in front of him, walked to the tyranny fragment, and stared at the hideous armor that was integrated with the broken runes. A combat power that surpasses everything. He wanted to reach out and touch the hideous armor, but then he thought of something and walked to the weapon table on the other side. There was an extremely sharp black axe on it. Looking closely, the black axe was about 1.6 meters long, with double-edged blades and a black axe body, and it looked extremely heavy. Black Cutter. This axe is the terrifying rune weapon that only the hands of Noxus can control. And no one knows why it does not corrode its successive masters. But now, the black-robed wizard looked at Darius and the rune weaver, realizing that the Empire has never given up the exploration and application of runes. Put on armor for me. Darius said in a deep voice. General, the rune power of tyranny fragment is very unstable. I don't recommend using it in this war. The rune weaver frowned, looked at Darius in front of him, and advised softly. Put on armor for me. Darius turned his back to the rune weaver and spoke again in a deep voice. This time, both the black-robed mage and the rune weaver heard Darius' unwavering faith. The rune weaver lowered his eyes, looked at the ferocious armor in front of him, and sighed. Then, her eyes fell on the black-robed mage not far away, and she said in a concentrated voice, I need your help. Me. The black-robed mage was surprised and looked at the shining tyranny fragment with a hesitant look. Just from the diffuse red light, he could feel the terrifying power contained in the tyranny fragment. If there is any mistake, he may die here directly. Yes, while I am putting on the armor for the general, I can't be distracted to deal with the overflowing energy of the tyranny fragment. The rune weaver stared at the red armor in front of him and slowly stretched out his white palm. I need you to use black magic later to suppress the overflowing energy. The black-robed wizard's expression suddenly changed. He was about to speak, but when he saw Darius's dark eyes looking at him, he had to step forward. No wonder he let me in. The black-robed wizard thought to himself, looking depressed. He walked behind the rune weaver and carefully released the power of black magic, wrapping his arms to form a pair of black gloves with sleeves. While watching the rune weaver put on armor for Darius, he paid attention to the swaying red light. Fortunately, things went smoothly. Darius put on the hideous crimson armor, and a touch of red light spread from the tyranny fragment, extending to his feet, hands, and head, rippling. Until it touched the black cutter tightly held in Darius's hand, it gradually calmed down and attached to the surface of the armor. However, the corrosiveness brought by the tyranny fragment eventually affected Darius. Darius, who was as solid as a rock and never showed weakness, couldn't help but growl in the endless pain brought by the tyranny fragment. The extremely suppressed roar, like a wolf's howl, spread throughout the sealed room. The black-robe wizard and the rune weaver suddenly became nervous. Once something happened to Darius, they couldn't imagine what would happen to the Noxus Empire. But one thing was guaranteed, the two of them would definitely not escape accountability, or even death. At the same time, Captain Farron, who was waiting outside, seemed to hear something. But he thought of Darius's order, suppressed his anxiety, and stood still like a sculpture. After a cup of tea, Captain Farron heard the sound of footsteps behind him and turned his head to look. He saw Darius, wearing ferocious armor and holding the black cutter, lifting the curtain. Behind him was the black-robed wizard and a strange and dashing woman. He did not ask more questions, remained silent, followed Darius, and came to the guardhouse on the camp again. In front of the frozen river, in the dense trenches, armored and bladed Noxian soldiers were ready, looking at the winter claw camp in front of them without fear. Darius took a step forward, his face cold, straightened his body, raised his right hand high, and swung it down like a hammer, bringing gusts of wind. Dong dong. 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 In an instant, the high and fierce drum beats, like a sudden rain, suppressed the snow and wind, and echoed over the Noxian legion. This is like the war song of the ancient Noxians. It sounded at this moment, awakening the blood in every Noxian and their thirst for war. It's the legion drummer. Under their drumming, the Noxian war group clusters are expanding the influence of the empire step by step. They are unstoppable, and there is indeed no enemy that can stop the empire's conquest. Now, they are about to face the challenge of the Winter Claw again. Note, the Noxian Empire has been studying runes, whether it is testing with black magic and blood magic, or applying it to weapons and armor. After a long time, it has achieved a lot of results. Chapter 73. Winterthorn Mountain Road. On the towering hills covered with wind and snow, the Winter's Claw tribe set up camp in this snow-white area and built their own camp. Looking up, one can see grey-white dome tents, like low pine trees, dotting the hills. Among them are the Winter's Claw tribe and some belonging to the Blood Alliance clan. Around the camp, there is a scout outpost, standing like a towering tree, with blue rune flags representing the claws of winter flying above it. Sejuani rode the Juvisk boar and stood in front of the outpost, overlooking the movement on the frozen river below. Darius's movements could not escape her eyes. She saw many battle groups becoming active in the Noxian camp, and Noxian soldiers began to gather one by one and entered the trenches dug in front of the frozen river. Volibear, can't wait. Udur walked along the rugged mountain road to Sejuani, pointing to the dim sky where thunder rumbled. The bears are ready to move. Sejuani turned her body sideways and stared at the bear camp not far away with a cold expression. Are they still not satisfied? During last night's battle, she had followed her oath and used the corpses of her people as sacrifices to the bear people who had lost their minds. Volibear originally represents wildness, war, and blood. Udur's eyes were deep, as if filled with many chaotic consciousnesses, glowing with dazzling brilliance. How can he be satisfied? He longs for war, longs for us and the Noxian Legion to fall into endless fighting. Deep purple thunder streaked across the sky, and dark clouds pressed against the wind and snow. Sejuani stared at the changing sky and fell into silence, her ice-like eyes becoming colder and colder. Georgie failed. Sejuani turned her head, looked into Udur's eyes, and suddenly spoke about the iceborn warriors under her command. Is it the little guy who was given the title of Giant Fist? Udur sorted out his confused consciousness and remembered a little guy he had seen before. Yes, behind us, in the territory of the Blood Alliance clan, there are some Noxus rats, wreaking havoc. Sejuani looked back at the snow-white mountains behind her and held the flail in her hand tightly. I arranged for Georgie to deal with it, but 4 days ago, all news about him was lost. The tribe's food was not enough to consume, so they could only draw some supplies from each Blood Alliance clan and transfer them to the front line. But now the Noxus rats appeared in the rear and destroyed many supply transport convoys. As a result, many tribesmen in the camp have starved to death and will never see next summer again. Whoops! Whoops! The Juvisk wild boar Steelmane under Sejuani felt the anger in his master's heart and kept trampling the snow with his thick hooves, showing off his sharp tusks. We only have one choice now. Sejuani stretched out her left hand to comfort the Juvisk boar. Same as the first battle of the Freljord, defeat Darius. Then we march straight in, flatten the northern border of the Noxus Empire, plunder all supplies, and help the tribes and blood alliances survive this cold winter wave. Udur opened his mouth and looked at Sejuani with a determined expression, knowing that he could not change her mind. But in his heart, he was still worried about the bears and Volibear. Boom! 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 Suddenly, the sound of high-pitched and fierce drums, like a sudden rain, came from the Noxian camp. Did you hear that? Darius can't wait too. Sejuani drove Steelmane to the front, overlooking the Noxian camp that was fully revived like a lion. Their legionary drummers beat the drums of war. We need to deal with them the old-fashioned way. Sejuani raised her right hand and waved the ultimate ice chain flail, sweeping up the scattered wind and snow. The Winter's Claw warrior standing on the outpost saw Sejuani's actions and immediately blew the huge horn in front of him. Woohoo! 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 The low sound of the horn sounded, spreading throughout the Winter's Claw camp and echoing in the gloomy sky. The Winter's Claw warriors, who were already in a state of war, quickly ran out of their tents wearing robes and holding bone blades. Blood warriors, hoplites, mammoth riders, ice bloods, and more. All the power belonging to the Winter's Claw, at this moment, was fully activated like a machine, gathering in the empty snow, looking at Sejuani who was riding the Juvisk wild boar with a feverish expression. Ogati! Sejuani roared angrily. From the array, a tall warrior wearing a grey-white fur robe and hard leather armor came out, with blood marks smeared on his hard face. Lead the blood warriors and break through the trenches of Noxus. Sejuani pointed to the Noxian camp not far away and issued an order. The frozen river has long been dyed red, but on the other side of the river, stretching trenches guard the Noxian camp. They have become an obstacle that the Winter's Claw tribe must overcome. Otherwise, there would be no way to storm the Noxian camp. Follow your will. Ogati knelt down on one knee. He looked at the snow-white ground under his feet, and his eyes gradually turned red when he thought of his daughter who had starved to death not long ago. The bodies of many companions had been buried in the ditch in front of the Noxian camp. But for Winter's Claw, for victory, more lives are needed to fill the long trenches. Ogati led the blood warriors and sang the tribal war song loudly. They were fearless and passionate. They turned into a stream of red and white war torrents, pouring down from the towering snow-white hills. Archers, suppress! Sejuani raised her right hand again, and pointed the true ice flail at the trench in front of the Noxian camp. Behind her, the Winter Claw archers came out, they pulled the bowstrings in unison, aimed at the trench, and shot. Buzz! 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 The dense rain of arrows filled the dim sky, covering the sky and the earth, and then fell into the parallel snow trenches like a sudden rainstorm. Those sharp arrows with barbs, wrapped in the force of falling, penetrated the sophisticated armor, and caused instant lethality. Even if their companions died in front of them. The Noxian soldiers were unmoved, their eyes locked on the war torrent pouring down from the hills. Buzz! 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 The sound of bowstrings, this time it is no longer the solo dance of the Winter Claw archers. In the Noxus camp, the sound of breaking through the air is endless, and sharp arrows turn into black shadows, piercing the grey sky, and falling down, with the iron arrowheads emitting cold light. The next moment, countless red blood flowers bloom in the war torrent of blood warriors. The sharp iron arrowheads easily pierce the fur and hard leather armor, and then pierce the muscles under the fat layer, cutting the blood vessels, leaving fatal wounds on the blood warriors' bodies. From a distance, under this arrow counterattack, the war torrent seems to have a brief pause, clearing some blank areas. But the blood warriors who came one after another quickly filled the gaps, continued to turn into a torrent of courage, and rushed to the trenches. Accompanied by the continuous sound of bowstrings. The overflowing blood kicked off this decisive battle. Chapter 74. Chapter 74 Ben Farron's determination, the glory of Noxus. The dark sky, the continuous rain of arrows, gradually dyed the snow red. From afar, the armored corpses became stepping stones for the blood warriors to move forward. Even the frozen river surface could not avoid being covered with black arrows. The warriors of the Winter Claw are indeed natural warriors tempered in a cruel and ruthless environment. After experiencing the invasion of arrows, they are like injured beasts, bursting out with a more terrifying desire to fight. They stepped on the corpses of their companions, crossed the wide river, and rushed into the trench. In an instant, a fierce battle took place in the snow trench. The Noxian soldiers who had been waiting for a long time rushed out from all corners of the trench and started a bloody fight with the blood warriors. Compared with the weapons and equipment of the Winter Claw, the Noxian soldiers relied on their sophisticated weapons and arrays to firmly resist the impact of the blood warriors. They were like precision instruments, using trenches as positions to surround and kill the blood warriors. Shield guards, spearmen, swordsmen, and other different types of soldiers appeared in every corner of the battlefield. When one fell, another would take his place, leaving the blood warriors who stepped into the trenches with a firm look. The blood stained the battle robes red with the blade. The ears were filled with the sound of war drums, shouts, and the fanatical roars of many warriors. Finally, it mixed with the dull drum beats, as if igniting the blood in the hearts of every Noxian. Clang! The sharp blade cut the blood warrior's throat, and the Noxian soldier held the blade desperately until the blood warrior completely lost resistance, and then slowly relaxed. When turning his head, the Noxian soldier saw his companions and the blood warriors beside him engaged in a melee in the snow, and immediately stepped forward to help. The sharp blade swung and fell on the back of the blood warrior, and the sprayed blood stained his face red. But he didn't see his companion get up. When he shook his companion's body, he saw a bloody finger hole on his fragile neck. And such scenes were frequently staged on the battlefield. The blood warriors of Winterclaw showed naked savage killing. This is Freljord, the frozen land and ice field, which taught them how to fight the god of death. Using fingers and teeth, they killed Noxian soldiers by any means. It only took a cup of tea. The trenches were full of corpses, and there were blood warriors and Noxian soldiers filling up the sunken gullies. Looking around, the snowy plains and the frozen river were full of black blood warriors. They faced the rain of arrows and poured into the trenches accompanied by ancient war songs. Every blood warrior's eyes were filled with desperate anger, like a completely out-of-control beast, fearlessly attacking the Noxian position. The bloody tide of war became more and more fierce as time passed. One wave has not yet subsided, another wave rises, and the oppressed Noxian soldiers are breathless. Get ready! In the Noxian camp, Captain Farron has left Darius and led his heavy infantry regiment to form a battle formation. Seeing that the situation in the trench has fallen into decline, he immediately waved his arm and signaled everyone to get ready. He was waiting for the flag officer on the high platform to convey the order. Isn't it time yet? Captain Farron looked at the many corpses filling the trench, and his expression under the silver-grey mask was a little anxious. Then he looked at the high platform and saw the tall figure like a sculpture, and his heart gradually calmed down. Captain Farron is different from most of the regiment leaders. He was born in the depths of the Zon Trench area. The young Captain Ben Farron was regarded as a scourge by the Zon people in that dark area, saying that he was capricious and unacceptable. That is why Captain Ben Farron left the Zon Trench area when he grew up and came to the Noxian Empire alone to become a Noxian soldier. In the Noxian army, he was supported, rewarded, and unstoppable. Later, Captain Farron was appreciated by Darius with his strong strength and size, joined his army, and became the leader of the warband. Therefore, in this empire, Captain Farron was loyal to only one person. Hand of Noxus Darius. Suppressing his inner thoughts, Captain Farron continued to wait, but this time, he soon saw the movement on the high platform tower in the distance. The flag officer in armor quickly waved the red flag in his hand and conveyed the order. Captain Farron immediately understood that it was time for his warband to go out. General Darius is watching us, let the bastards of the Winterclaw try our strength. Captain Farron took a deep breath, and a dull voice came from behind the mask, resounding over the formation. He waved the chain hammer in his hand and led the heavy infantry regiment under his command, like a steel torrent, to meet the wave of war raised by the blood warriors. In this war, the blood warriors showed their strength to the fullest. But the Noxians are never afraid of challenges. The enemy is cruel, they will be more cruel, and will return the favor without hesitation. Clang! The heavy and hideous chain hammer with barbs swung and directly crushed all the blood warriors in front of him. The blood all over the sky and the howling of pain showed the strength of Captain Farron. With the solid heavy armor and big body, Captain Farron led the heavy infantry and instantly suppressed the offensive of the blood warriors. They used their unstoppable formation to stop the blood warriors' advance. And in the trenches filled with corpses, they regained the offensive rhythm that belonged to Noxus. But this was not the end. Captain Farron bathed in the blood of the enemy, and the chain hammer in his hand turned into a silver storm, rolling up the blood, flesh, and bones, and rushed back to the trenches where the blood warriors were defending. Let the heavy infantry take over. In front of the Winterclaw camp, Sejuani stared at the bloody killing in the trenches, and a few ripples appeared in her cold eyes. In the territory of Freljord, the blood warriors who are good at fighting have encountered a real challenge. Boom! 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 Following Sejuani's order, the dull footsteps sounded in the camp. One by one, the tribal warriors in solid armor quickly gathered together. They were covered with heavy armor and held ferocious weapons made of steel. Then, they started running from the hill. Rumble! Rumble! Captain Farron was killing people everywhere. A deafening trembling sound rang out on the snowy plain in the distance. Looking up, he saw the heavy infantry belonging to the Winterclaw, like a flood that had been opened, venting, and raging. They had better armor and better weapons than the blood warriors. They were the core strength of the Winterclaw tribe. Now, under the command of the War Mother Sejuani, they rushed towards the blood-stained trench. Boom! The waves were surging, and the blood on the ground dyed the armor red. With the impact of the Winter Claw heavy infantry, the bloody smell in the trench became stronger and choked people's noses and mouths. Captain Farong gave up the blood warrior in front of him and led his regiment to face the heavy infantry that was charging head-on. But in a moment, the two sides fell into a deadly battle. The sound of steel clashing and angry shouts intertwined and converged into a red sonata of death. Countless flowers of life died in the battle. The Winter Claw and Noxus soldiers embellished the glory of this war with their blood and flesh. Chapter 75. Maybe it was affected by the war. The snowflakes all over the sky gradually stopped and sparsely fell to the ground. The rare midday sun in the Fjord was soaking into the increasingly dark sky and covering the snowy plains. However, the bright sunlight falling down had already been stained with a touch of blood red. In the snow trench, the fighting between the Winter's Claw tribe and the Noxian warband continued. The two sides were so entangled that neither side chose to retreat, nor did either side give up their trench positions. Endless fighting was taking place in the trenches strewn with corpses. Touches of rich blood-colored aura enveloped the battlefield like clouds. The soldiers seemed to be tireless, fighting the enemy bravely in the harsh ice and snow environment without flinching. Darius held the black cutter and stood on the high watchtower, looking at the chaotic bloody trench, which was falling into the hands of the Winter's Claw bit by bit. These are born warriors who were trained in a cruel and merciless environment. It certainly made the Noxian soldiers suffer. Send the order, let Chuajiao Luo enter the battlefield from the side. Darius looked at the area where Captain Farong was, his eyes lowered. The heavy infantry of Noxus and the heavy infantry of Winter's Claw turned the trench battlefield in the front into a death mill. Broken corpses were randomly discarded in the snow and allowed to be trampled. Dripping blood flowed along the trench, and the strong smell of rust filled the air. The trenches were gradually filled with corpses scattered throughout their confrontation area. Even though Captain Farong was still fighting hard, the area he was defending was gradually shrinking, and there were still blood warriors watching eagerly around him. Is it time for me to appear? On the side of the Noxian camp, the Tauren Shining Horn Orlo was wiping the ferocious hammer in his hand, and the dense steel barbs shone with a biting cold light. When he saw the flag commander at the high platform watchtower waving the flag at his regiment, he grinned, feeling that he could no longer suppress the manic murderous intention in his heart. Shining Horn Orlo stood up and walked to the front of the battle group. The crimson sunlight fell on the golden armor, creating a different kind of brilliance. He looked at the Tauren warriors gathered behind him and raised his ferocious heavy hammer high. They once succumbed to their enemies, but it was not until Noxus conquered this land that they understood what true freedom meant. This is why I fight for the Empire. Shuajiao Oluo's eyes turned red, pointing at the bloody battlefield ahead, and roared loudly. Charge! Bang! 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 On the snow-white ground, dull footsteps suddenly sounded. Shining Horn Oluo led the Tauren battle group under his command, rushing towards the formation of Winter's Claw from the side as if going crazy. The noisy and restless atmosphere is burning like a fire, burning the Tauren's heart. They were wearing special steel armor, their thick hooves trampled the bloody ground, and their sharp horns cut through the air. Using Shining Horn Oluo as an arrow, the Tauren warriors were like giant axes, cutting in the middle of the blood warrior formation. Boom! Boom! The ferocious heavy hammer overturned the blocking blood warrior, and the horns on it penetrated the hard leather armor. The Tauren battle group broke through the defense of the blood warriors, and then struck in the belly of the heavy infantry of Winter's Claw. The heavy infantry of Winter's Claw were like an overthrown crowd, falling into chaos. Captain Farong looked at the opportunity in front of him and launched a decisive counterattack. He shouted loudly to the heavy infantry under his command, cooperated with the Tauren warriors, and smashed away the panicked Winter's Claw warriors in front of him, killing them wantonly. The chain hammer danced, and Captain Farong, who was wearing heavy armor, seemed to be transformed into a killing machine, stirring up waves of bloodshed. Sonoras. The sharp axe chops, and the swinging hammer is cut off. 3 extremely strong Winter's Claw heavy infantry appeared in front of Captain Farong. They cooperated with each other and launched an offensive, preparing to intercept Captain Farong. But in the face of the surging steel torrent, the 3 Winter's Claw heavy infantry were completely helpless. They only raised a few waves and were submerged by the torrent led by Captain Farong. The Winter's Claw tribe, which was originally dominant, began to falter. In front of Winter's Claw camp, Sejuani looked down at the changing battlefield situation, and was about to raise her right hand, but when she waved it again, she fell into hesitation. She prepared to let the Iceborne warriors lead the Blood Alliance warriors to attack the Noxian warband from the side. But the figure on the high watchtower in the distance seems to know every step of her plan, and is always playing cards to suppress the attack rhythm of Winter's Claw. Learn from failure. Sejuani thought of Darius's miserable state during the first battle of Fruljord, when he was hunted down by the Winter's Claw tribe and fled back to the northern border of Noxus. She wanted to ask Hudur for his opinion, but out of the corner of her eye, she saw Hudur seeming to be meditating and regaining his mental strength. Sejuani turned her head and looked, as if she heard the howls of the bear people, and wanted to join the fight. She looked towards the Ursine camp and saw the hunting lord staring at her. According to the oath, the bears must obey her orders before they can join the battle. No matter what, we must win. Sejuani looked at the cold corpses covering the battlefield with a cruel expression. She knew that her decision would make the corpses of her people become sacrifices. But now the Winter's Claw tribe is in dire straits. In order to let more people survive, she has no choice. Swish! Swish! The chains rang. Sejuani waved the true ice flail in her hand, signaling the bears to attack the Noxian camp. Roar! 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 Seeing Sejuani's actions, the hunting lord could no longer suppress the desire for war in his mind, and let out a loud roar. The dim sky responded to the hunting lord's voice, and thunder flashed. The deep purple light fell on the running bears, corroding their bloody skin. Even though they had harvested the spoils of Noxian soldiers earlier, they were still ragged and ran like savages. Behind them were groups of wild beasts. Most of these beasts running on the snow were bears, with different sizes and fur colors. They were a group of lost ones, who were once beast spirit walkers, but now they were trapped in the ruthless giant bear form and lost their minds. Perhaps they had long forgotten that they were once human beings. Behind them were the monsters. They were all strange mixtures of bears and other creatures, things from legends, nightmares, and folk tales. But now they had been completely devoured by the beast spirits, and they no longer had the appearance of normal animals. Under the leadership of the Lord of the Hunt, they turned into filthy waves, flooding the pale snow, and were pouring into the bloody battlefield. The arrows that fell from the sky like drizzle, scratched the fur, and embedded in the flesh, not causing too much fatal damage to the bears. They were running wantonly, intending to harvest the feast on the battlefield. Naku's camp. Darius, standing on the high platform, saw the filthy waves coming from afar, and a hideous smile appeared on his calm face. "Haha, bear spirit! Dare to sacrifice Noxians to Vala Bear!" He immediately raised his arms and waved them angrily in the direction of the Lord of the Hunt. "Try the gift I prepared for you monsters." Chapter 76. In the corner of the camp, in front of a vehicle covered with thick fur. It seemed that it had not moved for a long time, and the white snowflakes piled up on the fur, dyeing them white. After seeing the flag officer waving the red flag in his hand, the middle-aged war group leader wearing chainmail immediately roared, signaling the Noxian soldiers around the vehicle to move quickly. Crash! Crash! The soaked fur fell to the ground, and a huge steel monster with a metallic luster appeared in the field of vision. Steel crossbow. The heavy war equipment made by the Noxian Empire is specially used to deal with difficult giant enemies and extraordinary people who attack cities and legions. The whole body of the car is made of steel, the top of the front of the car is an inverted triangle, and there are arc-shaped steel armor extending on both sides. At the tip of the inverted triangle, there is also a double-edged axe mark unique to the Noxian Empire. Creak! Creak! As the heavy fur fell to the ground, a Noxian soldier stepped forward, pushing the steel crossbow, and moving forward on the flat and solid road. The wheels made of steel rubbed against the ground, making a sharp sound and leaving clearly visible snow marks on the snow. Counting carefully, there were about 50 steel ballistas, which were pushed by Noxian soldiers and stopped in front of the camp. The direction the steel body was pointing was exactly the direction of the dirty waves raised by the bears. When the steel ballistas were in place, 4 Noxian soldiers appeared on both sides of each ballista. They were shirtless, with bulging muscles, and quickly divided the work and cooperated to place the hideous and thick crossbow arrows, adjust the direction, etc. Target, north, 400 steps away. The middle-aged war group leader wearing chainmail looked at the dirty waves in the distance and gave a decisive order. Shoot! Bang! 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 The dull sound of the steel ballista exploded, like thunder, breaking up the scattered snowflakes. The next moment, the dark sky seemed to be covered with a black curtain. One after another, the ferocious steel crossbow arrows, like wild beasts on the loose, cut through the air, leaving clear traces of breaking through the air, and appeared in the sight of the bears. They looked at the steel crossbow arrows hanging from the sky in confusion, and had no time to react. Instant! A dazzling red blood flower bloomed in the filthy waves. The steel crossbow arrows, which were almost as thick as fists, ignored the fur of the bears, wrapped in flesh and bone residue, and pierced through their sturdy bodies. Then, maintaining the terrifying impact, it penetrated the beast behind again, until it plowed a bloody road and fell into the snow. Looking from a distance, under the coverage of the first round of steel crossbows, the filthy waves were like a clean and tidy eraser that erased part of the part, leaving a large blank space. Roar! Roar! After the shock ended, the shrill howl echoed over the waves. The hunting lord looked at the blank area around him and roared angrily. Even he was slightly injured by the iron crossbow just now. Looking back, the corpses on the ground stimulated the hunting lord. His eyes turned red, and the sound of thunder sounded in his chaotic consciousness, and the filthy waves that covered the sky and earth surged again. Facing the horrible slaughter of the iron crossbow, the bears did not retreat at all, and continued to charge forward fearlessly. Second round, 300 steps, shoot! Staring at the filthy waves that continued to move forward, the middle-aged war group leader frowned and gave orders again. Behind him, the Noxian soldiers began to get busy and reinstall the crossbows. Bang! 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 The iron crossbow roared like a giant beast, and together with the falling rain of arrows, it once again artificially created a killing hell. The wailing sound of steel crossbows piercing the body frequently sounded over the battlefield. In the ears of Noxian soldiers, it became the most pleasant death song. Under the coverage of the steel crossbow, the bears had suffered a bloody baptism before they reached the trench. They realized that the feast in front of them did not seem so delicious. In front of the winter claw camp, Sejuani looked at the heavy crossbow that almost pierced the sky, and her face twitched. This was a terrifying war machine that had never appeared during the first Freljord campaign. She had planned to let the Mammoth Riders lead the Blood Alliance warriors to attack from the side, cross the trench full of corpses, and crush all the Noxian war groups that blocked it. But now, looking at the embarrassment of the filthy waves, she couldn't imagine what the scene would be like if the Mammoth Riders had just launched an assault. Even the ice warriors in the Winter Claw tribe could not calmly face the coverage and cleaning of the steel crossbow. Perhaps they could rely on their own ice blood to resist one heavy crossbow arrow, 2, or even 3. But the steel crossbow arrows covering the sky, it would definitely bring unimaginable disasters to the iceborne warriors. Sejuani looked at the Noxian camp in the distance, at the steel monsters, and realized that this could not go on. Now that the bears were attracting firepower, they had to hurry to cross the trench and break through the Noxian camp. Mammoth Riders, charge! Sejuani raised her arms and roared at the Noxian camp. Boom! 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 In the Winter Claw camp behind them, huge mammoths appeared one after another, and on their backs were mammoth riders wearing heavy armor. The mammoths were about 5 meters tall. The skull is short and tall, with an arched front and sharp incisors that are strongly curved and spiraled. In particular, it is covered with fine, long brown-gray hair and thick skin. Even without any armor, it has very good defensive capabilities. Following Sejuani's order, the Mammoth Riders drove the mammoths under their crotch and launched a terrifying charge towards the Noxus camp. No orders were needed. Almost all the soldiers fighting on the battlefield noticed the Mammoth Riders rushing down from the towering hills. There were not many Mammoth Riders, only 20 Mammoth Riders. But the brown-gray wave they brought shocked everyone. Retreat, retreat, return to the trenches behind. Captain Farron, who was fighting with the Winter Claw warriors, looked at the Mammoth Riders rushing in the distance, and immediately roared loudly, signaling his soldiers to retreat to the trenches at the back. Olo, the Shining Horn, also noticed the brown-gray wave in the distance. He looked at the mammoth with fine long hair and sharp incisors, and his expression suddenly changed. Sejuani is crazy, isn't she afraid of trampling on her own people? Shimmering Horn Oro thought angrily, and then made the same decision as Captain Farron. Retreat! 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 He quickly asked his Tauran warriors to retreat back to the trench to avoid the frontal attack of the mammoth. In order to buy time, he rushed into the array of the pursuing Winter Claw warriors with golden horns and sledgehammers. Terrible roar! Shimmering Horn Oro took a deep breath, suddenly opened his mouth, and let out a deafening roar. The invisible sound waves spread in the bloody trench, instantly shocking the fanatical Winter Claw warriors, fixing them in place, and blood flowed from their eyes. Bang! 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 Then, without hesitation, Olo swung his heavy hammer and smashed their heads, leaving them covered in blood and brains. But as he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of the direction of the Noxian camp. It seemed that a ferocious figure emerged behind the iron crossbow, ready to stop the mammoth riders. Chapter 77 Winterthorn Mountain Road. In the snow-white hills, in a bleak mountain forest, mottled blood is reflected. Looking beyond the tall pine trees covered with snowflakes in front, you can see the interior of the mountain forest, which is extremely wide. The fallen cedar trees that once stood there disappeared after being cut down. What appeared on the broad ground was the figure of the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry. They sat in silence in the open space, closing their eyes and resting. Beside them were armored war horses gathered together. The horses' hooves had already been covered with fur, and their mouths were covered with simple fur, keeping silent. Huo Jixing leaned against the pine tree, hiding in the back. He looked at the tragic bloody battlefield in the distance, and his heart rippled. Even though he had been mentally prepared and had gone through the baptism of killing, he still couldn't help himself when he saw the life and death fight on the battlefield. War in the cold weapon age was almost brutal hand-to-hand combat. Whether it is the Noxus Empire or the Winter's Claw tribe, both sides are pouring soldiers into the trenches endlessly, just to win the war. When are we going to take action? Huo Jixing suppressed the thoughts in his heart and looked at Wilson beside him. Wait for orders. Wilson retracted his gaze from observing the battlefield, looked at Cled who was resting on the desert dragon lizard not far away, and spoke softly. Lord Cled will make the right choice. Huo Jixing also looked at Klee who was resting and nodded slowly. Since the recent battle on the hillside, the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry had marched all the way to the Winterthorn Mountain Road where they were now, which really made them a little tired. While running, Huo Jixing also realized Klee's temper. Occasionally, you can joke around, but when it comes to commanding the team, no one can disobey Cled's orders. I'm going to take a break. Huo Jixing thought that he might participate in the next battle. After thinking for a while, he said to Wilson. Be careful, don't go too far. Wilson warned. Huo Jixing nodded, then moved his body in the snow and quietly left the back of the pine tree. The environment around the mountain forest has been scouted and can be confirmed to be a safe place. He walked to a depression that he had paid attention to before, and with the help of the tree stump, he suddenly realized and opened the data panel. Name, Huo Jixing. Quality, 4-5. Strength, 3.08. Physique, 3.12. Agility, 3.28. Spirit, 4.12. Skills, Conquering Blade, Survival in the Wilderness, Introspection of Oneself, and Photographic Memory. Talent, Sozaku, Fire of Nanli, Red Eyes of Fire, Sozaku's Cry. Under the healing effect of Nanli Fire, Huo Jixing's physical injuries have basically recovered, and various attributes have been significantly improved. The 3 attributes of Strength, Constitution, and Agility have reached more than 3 points. The mental attribute is the most prominent, reaching 4 points. In addition to the baptism of cruel battle, it is more about the changes in physical fitness brought about by lighting up Lu Su. Huo Jixing leaned on the tree stump and looked at the dim sky in the distance. The deep purple thunder is like a horned dragon, flying in the clouds and mist, soaring in the sky. Immortal Thunder Volibear. In this war, the Noxus Empire's opponents are not only the Winter's Claw tribe, but also the resurrecting Freljord god, the physical embodiment of the storm. Volibear. I originally wanted to keep some essence. Huo Jixing shook his head gently. The appearance of the bears disrupted his plans. If he was originally just a member of the Winter's Claw tribe, with his current strength, he would have no problem surviving the battlefield. Therefore, he planned to dismantle the Zhenbing weapon and save the essence for future use. But now the plan cannot keep up with the changes. Huo Jixing took out the blue Zhenbing weapon, 2 daggers and a pair of fists from his leather bag. This is a trophy obtained from the Fox Wanderer and the Iceborne Warrior. Frostfang Shaman's runic items have been decomposed and turned into essence, which is displayed on the data panel. Do you want to decompose the Zhenbing weapon? Hearing the cold reminder in his ear, Huo Jixing took a deep breath and chose to confirm. Breakdown. As soon as his consciousness fell, countless dark green data streams appeared in his pupils, pouring out like mercury, wrapping the Zhenbing weapon and slowly melting. During the melting process, the Zhenbing weapon released a hazy and illusory cold air, but was eventually swallowed up by the dark green data flow. Congratulations to the host, the decomposition was successful and the essence 120 was obtained. When he heard the final system prompt, Huo Jixing frowned and looked surprised. Compared with the previous 70 points for decomposing the Zhenbing weapon, this time it was 50 points more. Then he thought that the number of Zhenbing weapons decomposed this time was indeed larger. After careful calculation, the essence now totals 165 points, which can already light up the next star. Immediately Huo Jixing's consciousness sank into the red star map. The next moment, he appeared in the boundless universe, surrounded by an extremely familiar environment. There were 7 Sozaku stars hanging in the sky, 3 of which were already lit. They are Jingsu, Ghost, and Liasu. The 3 stars hung upside down in the starry sky like the blazing sun, and the red-gold fire of Nanli turned into mist, spreading across the starry sky. Huo Jixing's eyes fell on the 4th star. Stars? 100 points of essence. Huo Jixing whispered. This is the information from the data panel. It takes 100 points of essence to light up the 4th star Xingziu. And this number is more than the previous ones added together. I hope the number required later will not be more outrageous. Huo Jixing shrugged his shoulders. He had long realized that the number of essences required to light up the stars later would increase, but his inner hope was not too outrageous. The most important thing is that this is the number specified by the data panel and cannot be changed. Fortunately, after he decomposed the Zhenbing weapon this time, the number of essences he obtained was enough. Then, light up Xingziu. Buzz. Buzz. The data panel glowed, and 100 points of blue essence were injected into the red star map. But in a moment, the sky full of fireworks in the boundless universe bloomed, turning into a red-gold wave, rushing towards the Xingziu star that had already trembled. Rumble. Xingziu lit up, as if injecting endless energy into the Sozaku star map. The Nanli fire that permeated the boundless universe instantly became active, and a scarlet ribbon was faintly swaying, connecting the 3 shining stars in front. The 2 reflected each other, and the red flames almost occupied most of the starry sky. The bird flag has 7 tassels, which symbolizes the quail fire. As the star of the constellation lit up, golden red words that were imprinted deep in the consciousness emerged one by one. Huo Jixing looked carefully and thought about it. He could understand most of the golden red words this time. In memory, tassels refer to embroidery on clothes, which represents part of the ability of constellation, perhaps related to defense. Quail fire means the heart of the vermilion bird, which has abundant energy, which is easy to understand. Then, it represents the talent skills of constellation. He quickly confirmed it through the information in his consciousness and the data panel. Vermilion bird flowing fire feather clothes. It seems that I guessed right, it is indeed a defensive ability. Huo Jixing looked at the extra talent on the data panel and smiled. In order to avoid waste, he concentrated his mind and performed Sozaku flowing fire feather clothes in the Sozaku star map. Red golden rays of light filled the air. Huo Jixing lowered his eyes and saw the Nanli fire attached to the surface of his skin, turning into pieces of red golden feathers, like flame armor, blessing his body. In addition, he could feel that his physical fitness had improved again. Chapter 78. Name, Huo Jixing. Essence, 65. Strength, 3.48. Constitution, 3.52. Agility, 3.58. Spirit, 4.42. Skills, Blade of Conquest, Wild Survival, Self-Observation, Photographic Memory. Talent, Sozaku, Fire of the South, Red Eyes, Sozaku Crying, Flowing Fire Feather Clothes. Huo Jixing's consciousness exited the Sozaku star chart, returned to his body, and looked at the data panel in his pupils. He saw that his physical attributes had improved again. Sure enough, the only way to improve myself is to obtain more rune items. Huo Jixing sighed secretly. Compared with before the mission, his physical attributes and talent abilities have undergone earth-shaking changes. It can be said that he easily beat his previous self. Flowing fire feather clothes. Huo Jixing felt his abundant energy and stretched out his palm. A red gold flame rose up, slowly turned into wings, extended along the palm, and covered the arm like armor. Very easy. He closed his eyes and sensed his own state. Under normal circumstances, using the fire of Nanli would no longer affect himself. Even if Suzaku Frenzy, Suzaku Red Eyes and Fire Pupils or Suzaku Crying were used, the blood consumed as firewood would be reduced a lot. Of course, there were exceptions in the case of risking one's life. After all, it was related to one's own life and death, and only more violent flames could make Huo Jixing feel the ultimate sense of security. Hey, your fire ability is indeed extraordinary. Hey! Hearing the voice in his ear, Huo Jixing's expression suddenly changed drastically, and his right hand was directly placed on the long knife at his waist, ready to take action. However, when he saw the mind of the desert dragon lizard probing from behind, he suppressed his panic. Lord Kled, you don't have to sneak over here, right? Kid, be careful with your words. Kled waved the axe in his hand, seeming a little unhappy. What do you mean sneak? It's obviously you who are too focused. Looking at the carefree Kled in front of him, Huo Jixing suppressed the twitch of his mouth. Although his consciousness entered the data panel, he always paid attention to the slightest movement around him. With his current spiritual attribute of 4 points. Except for Kled, if others approached, he could be the first to notice it. What are you doing here? Why do I feel that your life breath has increased a lot? Kled Rodsker and walked around Huo Jixing. In his only intact eyes, he looked at Huo Jixing with curiosity. This is one of my fire abilities. Huo Jixing said bluntly, after melting the true ice weapon, I got some power. The birth of a lie must be made up with countless lies. The Gregory couple already knew some of his talents, and Wilson, as their old friend, must have known it too. Instead of denying it, it is better to admit it directly. Huo Jixing showed his ability openly. This is also the purpose of learning extraordinary knowledge in the beginning. Well, I heard Wilson say that. Kled nodded and motioned Sker to get closer to Huo Jixing. It seems that your fire power is not simple. It can melt the true ice weapon. If the Fruljord people know, you may become their royal craftsman. Kled retracted his gaze. He did not choose the bad habit of asking questions, but avoided the topic. Let's go, it's time to go back. Kled turned around and rode Sker back. I woke up after sleeping and found that you were not there. I thought you were captured by the scouts of the Winter Claw. The back of the pine tree with accumulated snowflakes. Wilson, who was silently observing the battlefield, heard the sound and turned back. He happened to see Kled and Huo Jixing coming together, and his expression was a little surprised. What's the situation? Kled walked over and then hit the desert dragon lizard that followed with a sharp axe. Sker, get down, you're too obvious. Gurgle. Dola. Sker looked at the dim sky and shook his head. Yahoo, you dare to talk back. Krayi was about to say something, but Sker tilted his neck and lay down directly, knocking him staggering and almost falling on the snow. Enough, bastard! Krayi was angry and hit Sker hard with the axe handle, but it seemed useless. Wilson and Huo Jixing looked at each other, looking quite helpless. After waiting for a while, seeing that Krayi seemed to be tired of hitting, Wilson whispered, the Winter Claw tribe has sent out heavy infantry and is fighting for control of the trench. Krayi nodded gently, and his fierce eyes fell on the bloody battlefield in the distance. It seems that Sejuani is going to use all her resources this time. The heavy infantry is a war group specially formed to deal with us. If they are against Avarosa, they like these slow-moving targets very much. Kled's short body was hidden in the pine trees and snow. He was paying attention to the battlefield and the dark sky with changing winds and clouds, his eyes flickering. The winter cold wave in Fruljord is a bit unbearable, otherwise they would not have formed an alliance with the bears, and they would not have fought so hard. The Undying Thunder Vala Bear, a legendary god in Fruljord. I have heard of his name, when Noxus was first established. Well, I wanted to fight him, but unfortunately I didn't have the chance. Wilson automatically ignored the second half of the sentence, looked at the increasingly brutal battlefield in the distance, and asked, when do we join the battlefield? Not yet. Kree shook his head and refused, staring at the bloody battlefield in the trench. The war situation is not clear yet, and Darius has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, so keep waiting. The next time. Huo Jixing, Kree, and others continued to hide in the snowy mountains and forests, silently watching the tragic battle in the bloody battlefield. Occasionally, Kree's comments would sound, dispelling the silent atmosphere. This little guy Farron is getting stronger. Olo the Shining Horn is good, and there are also Tauren warriors. I conquered that land before and brought them freedom. Let me see what the bears look like. They are so ugly. A group of unconscious and irrational puppets. Wow, look, it's the iron crossbow, Darius is worthy of it. This time, we must teach the Winter Claw tribe a lesson and wash away the humiliation brought by the first Freljord campaign. What a beautiful scene, the blood flowers brought by the iron crossbow. Until Cled saw the brown-grey waves of terror caused by the Mammoth Riders, his expression changed a little. Mammoth Riders, Sejuani finally couldn't bear it anymore. Boom! Boom! Huo Jixing heard the roar coming from afar, and looked at the mammoths that looked like speeding heavy trucks, with a look of surprise. The huge body of more than 5 meters high, sharp incisors and fangs, and thick fur. He couldn't imagine how to stop the charge of these big guys. Haha, I knew Darius had a way. Cled said happily, looking at the Noxian camp in the distance, a ferocious smile appeared on his plush face. What about Mammoth Riders? Noxians will not be afraid. Chapter 79. Inside the Noxian camp. On the white and solid road, the bloody sunlight fell, reflecting a huge black shadow. Dragon Lizard Riders. The Noxian Empire's trump card war group. The Dragon Lizard Riders gathered in the camp, riding adult dragon lizards, wearing steel armor, with red cloaks fluttering behind them. The wild and restless dragon lizards opened their bloody mouths and kept roaring, their dark green horns piercing the sky, and their scaly tails swinging, as if to crush all obstacles. Boom! Boom! When the flag officer on the high platform tower waved the flag in his hand, the dragon lizard riders quickly tightened the steel reins, held the steel lances tightly, and rode the dragon lizards to run quickly. In an instant, a roar like a mountain collapse sounded behind the Noxian formation, and a terrifying and huge dragon lizard rushed into the battlefield from the side. They couldn't wait to crush all the enemies in front of them. A strong bloody smell filled the air as the dragon lizards ran. For a moment, the momentum brought by the dragon lizard riders actually suppressed the terrifying momentum brought by the mammoths. As the distance got closer, the roar that shook the snow became louder and louder. Looking down from the sky, the dark brown waves surging on the snowy hills, carrying pale snowflakes, rushed towards the Noxus camp all at once, as if the snow mountain collapsed. And in front of the trench, the red and green torrents that vented in the Noxus camp also arrived at the right time. But in an instant, 2 different torrents and waves met in front of the trench. Bang! Bang! Crack! Crack! The mammoths and adult dragon lizards, like a bunch of out-of-control heavy trucks, suddenly collided with each other, making a terrifying sound like piercing the clouds and cracking the rocks. In an instant, the giant elephant overturned and the dragon lizard fell. In the dancing snowflakes, there were also sounds of tusks breaking and incisors piercing flesh. More often, there were shouts and fighting sounds from the mammoth riders and dragon lizard riders, who rushed to the enemy recklessly. Blood-colored waves rose, drowning reason. Almost fell into the hands of the mammoth riders. Olo, the Shining Horn, stopped in front of the last trench, and looked at the scene of the mammoth riders and dragon lizard riders fighting not far away with a trembling body. Compared to Captain Farron and his men who evacuated to the trench, under the incisor feet of the mammoths and dragon lizards, the corpses of the Winter Claw warriors and Noxian soldiers paved the way of death. These poor guys who were caught in the selfless fight and had no time to evacuate became the victims of this charge like broken dolls. But the battle is not over yet. With the addition of mammoth riders and dragon lizard riders, the war is gradually entering a climax. Shimmering Olo looked at the filthy bears rushing towards him, swinging his ferocious hammer and cruelly harvesting the lives of the bears. Compared to the bear spirit monsters, these bears who survived the steel crossbows were already covered with wounds. Under the repeated attacks of the Tauren warriors and heavy infantry, they resisted with difficulty. As for the bear monsters and bear spirit monsters, they were almost unable to move under the focus of the steel crossbow. Just when Shimmering Olo and Captain Farron saw the dawn of victory, the biting cold wind blew from a distance, and the extreme low temperature cooled the restless blood in their bodies. It's Sejuani. Looking up in the distance, they saw a familiar figure in their memory, riding a Juvisk boar, rushing over. The snow along the way turned into condensed frost, paving a blue ice road. On the towering hills, the whistling cold wind blew the robes. The moment Sejuani saw the dragon lizard rider, she knew that Darius had made extremely thorough preparations for this war. She took a deep breath and raised the true ice flail in her hand high, showing her determination to go all out. Winter's Claw! Ride forward and scatter them! With a high roar, Sejuani drove the excited Juvisk boar bristle and launched the final charge. Behind her, the iceborne warriors were ready for battle, holding true ice weapons. Following the tall figure in front, they rushed towards the Noxian camp. Whoosh! Whoosh! The winter storm invaded, and the bitter cold condensed the blood-stained ground. Sejuani's cold eyes looked at the dragon lizard rider blocking the trench, and swung the true ice flail in her hand. Trample them! The azure light flashed, and a touch of extreme frost, like a meteor, crossed the frozen river and accurately hit the dragon lizard rider. Boom! The frost condensed, and at a terrifying speed, it instantly froze the dragon lizard rider who was blocking in front of it. From a distance, the frost was far more than that, like a permafrost field, ignoring the defense of the dragon lizard rider and the Noxian soldiers, and engulfing everyone. Until the ice condensed into dozens of lifelike ice sculptures, standing on the battlefield. Snap! 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 Steelmane looked at the frozen ice sculptures, unable to suppress his inner restlessness, trampled on them with his front hooves, and crushed the ice sculptures with his sharp fangs. Instantly, the broken frost, mixed with flesh and blood, fell on the snow like a continuous drizzle. Perhaps it stimulated Steelmane, it began to completely let go of itself, rushing left and right on the battlefield, extremely happy. Sejuani, sitting on the saddle, looked cold. She rode on Steelmane, constantly waving the true ice flail in her hand, and with the power of ice, she wantonly harvested the lives of Noxian soldiers. Whether it is dragon lizard riders or heavy infantry. Facing Sejuani's flails, he was like a trembling prey, unable to move. The azure frost swept across the battlefield like a death storm, freezing all the enemies in front of him. Then, under the fangs of Steelmane, it turned into ice fragments. Clang! The dull sound of collision exploded over the battlefield. Sejuani stared at the red figure stepping out of the frost in front of her, with a cruel look and a cold voice. Darius! Darius, wearing hideous armor and holding a black cleaver, looked at the strong woman riding a Juvisk boar and said in a deep voice. Sejuani, you can't win this war. Just you. Sejuani said sarcastically, you said so during the first battle of Fruljord, but I was the winner in the end. The true ice flails swung, and the frost storm came. Sejuani drove Steelmane and rushed towards Darius. She would not miss the opportunity in front of her. As long as Darius was defeated, victory in this war would be within her grasp. Clang! Clang! The giant axe and the chain collided, and the crimson and azure rays of light shone against each other. Darius relied on the rune power of the Black Cutter and Tyrannical Fragment to barely resist Sejuani's terrifying attack. They passed each other again. Sejuani turned around and looked at Darius, with a hint of doubt and surprise on her cold face. The power of black magic. Sejuani looked past Darius and looked at the high platform tower of the camp. She saw a black-robed wizard standing on the top of the tower, with black rays of light lingering in his hands, frequently falling on herself and the iceborne warriors. But in an instant, countless negative magics fell like a torrential rain, weakening the ice blood power of her and the iceborne warriors. In addition, Sejuani also sensed an extremely violent and terrifying power from Darius. It was the existence of this power that made Darius reluctantly fight with her. It's the power of runes. Sejuani looked at the crimson armor Darius was wearing, and noticed the red runes flashing on his chest, which was also the source of the violent power. Darius, you actually use the power of runes with a mortal body. The erosion brought by the power of runes is far beyond the ability of ordinary people to bear. This is the consensus of many forces in Valoran. Could it be that the Noxus Empire can already do it? Sejuani's heart suddenly emerged with a horrified thought, and then she suppressed her inner emotions. Even so, I will defeat you again. Chapter 80. In front of the frozen river. The criss-crossing bloody trenches were filled with broken, cold corpses. Amidst the shouts that resounded through the sky, the Winter's Claw warriors and the Noxian soldiers were like wild beasts fighting to the death, fighting bloody battles all over the snow. Sonoras. The strong steel chain rattled, and the hammer head, already soaked in blood, hit the falling ice weapon. Moment. A touch of blue frost spreads along the intersection, seemingly spiritually. However, as the steel chain shook, the condensed frost shattered and fell to the snow. Captain Farong relied on his sturdy heavy armor and the strength of his bulk to repel the Iceborne who were attacking the array in front of him. But the heavy infantryman beside him could not avoid the other Iceborne. The snow was soaked in red blood, and the blue frost was like a rising wave, freezing the heavy infantrymen who fought bloody battles. Their bodies were ruthlessly shattered under the blows of the Zhenbing weapons. Although the Iceborne's extraordinary power was intimidating, the Noxian soldiers were still fearless of life and death, rushing towards the Iceborne one after another, determined to gnaw a piece of flesh and blood. In the distance, Oluo, who was surrounded by bears, was equally uncomfortable. The golden heavy armor was shattered, and claw marks covered the strong body, some deep and some shallow, and there were even hideous wounds on the pale bones. Click! The spiked hammer swung, smashing the bear man's head into pieces. After Oluo Shininghorn slaughtered another ursine that was slaughtering Noxian soldiers, he began to pant heavily. This battlefield lasted too long and consumed too much energy. In addition, with the scars all over his body, he could only rely on his will to persevere. At the moment when he was breathing heavily, he saw Darius not far away fighting against Sejuani, preventing the opponent from going deep into the Noxian array. Remember! The hand of Noxus is fighting with us. Shuajiao Oluo took a breath, suppressed his blush, and roared. Don't let these bastards underestimate the will of Noxus, kill them! A dull sound sounded over the battlefield. Every Noxian soldier who was immersed in fighting and struggling mustered up his energy and looked at the tall figure wearing a crimson cloak who was determined to fight to the death, his eyes flushed red. Cowardice is contagious, and so is bravery. After seeing the familiar figure of Darius, the tired Noxian soldiers once again burst out with fierce fighting spirit and rushed towards the enemy in front of them. For Noxus! For Noxus! For Noxus! Under the gloomy sky, roars sounded one after another. The tired bodies of the Noxian soldiers seemed to have endless energy again. They gripped their sharp blades and charged towards the enemy in front of them bravely. The time has come. In the snow-covered mountain forest, Kled tightened the reins and motioned for Scar to get up. Boy, you're lucky. You can fight with the great furious knight and the hand of Noxus. Kled turned over and stood on Scar's back, looking down at Huajixing, and said with a smile. Wilson, notify all cavalry to assemble. He turned to look at Wilson and gave the order. Huajixing stood up, looked at Wilson's leaving figure, and stood silently behind Kled. As if remembering something, he turned his head and looked to the west of the wide open space where DeWitt and the others were recuperating. He was a little worried whether this fight would force them to be together. Huajixing then realized that his worries were unnecessary. In just a moment, the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry had already assembled in the wide open space. The armored horses they were riding on were holding heavy lances, and their faces were covered by crimson visors, but their fanatical eyes were staring at Kled at the front. Lord Kled, everyone has gathered. Hearing Wilson's voice, Kled looked back, and the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry, each wearing sharp armor, was reflected in his pupils. There is also the red double-edged axe flag fluttering in the cold wind, which brings a strong smell of rust as if it is full of blood. Everyone, get ready! Sonoras. Along with Kled's cold voice, the sound of uniform movements sounded. The Noxian Scarlet Cavalry clenched the heavy lance in his hand, pointing the sharp blade straight at the bloody battlefield in the distance. They heard shouts and saw many companions fighting bloody battles. These made them feel the boiling blood in their bodies very clearly, just like the flags flying above their heads, waiting for the moment of catharsis. One day in Biwan, the grass blades were like halberds. The cold wind is biting and those who trespass will die. Kled sang softly to himself an ancient poem composed by Noxian bards. Then he waved the silver axe in his hand, a ferocious smile appeared on his grey plush face, and he roared loudly. For Noxus! For Noxus! The shouts and roars that resounded through the sky shook the snow-covered mountains and forests. The Noxian Scarlet Cavalry drove their dismounted horses, followed Kled closely, and launched a fearless charge. Boom! Using the desert dragon lizard Scar as an arrow, armored war horses trampled on the snow, and the sound like thunder shook the fine snowflakes. In the biting cold wind, a red-backed double-edged axe flag fluttered high, like a red ribbon, cutting through the gloomy sky. Captain Farong, who was fighting desperately in the snowy battlefield, heard a rumble in the distance and his heart sank. But when he looked in the direction of the voice, surprise and joy appeared in the cold eyes behind the visor. It's the Noxian Blood Cavalry. Not only Captain Farron, but also Sparkling Olo, and every Noxian soldier on the battlefield. They saw the steel wave rushing in from afar, The double-edged axe flag flying high was the symbol of the Noxian Empire. In such a tense battle, such a scene deeply stimulated everyone on the battlefield. Sejuani, you are going to lose this war. Darius tightly grasped the black cleaver in his hand to resist the attack of the true ice flail. Whenever the azure frost permeated and eroded, the crimson armor would always glow to prevent the spread of the frost. Even so, Darius was still struggling to persist. Cracks had already appeared on the crimson armor, and the cracked skin and coagulated blood could be seen underneath. Raging Night Kled. Sejuani looked at the surging steel wave in the distance, looking embarrassed. The Winter Claw tribe has already exhausted all its strength, and now there is no extra strength to stop the Noxian blood cavalry. She looked at Darius, the murderous intent in her eyes seemed to be real. But Udur's warning words echoed in her ears, and she had to make a choice. Darius exhaled a breath of frost and licked his cracked lips. He was puzzled. He didn't know why Sejuani didn't go all out, but now. The balance of victory is leaning towards Noxus. Chapter 81. Under the dim sky. The crimson steel wave, bathed in the purple light of thunder, was like a sharp spear, brazenly piercing into the belly of the Winter Claw. Bang! 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 In an instant. The terrifying impact of the heavy cavalry was fully demonstrated on the snowy plains, and the dull sound of collisions was like waves hitting rocks, crushing all obstacles along the way. The heavy lance made of steel easily pierced through the bodies of the bears, and the sprayed blood dyed the visors red. From a distance, at the moment of contact between the two sides, the bears who were raging on the battlefield suffered heavy damage, and the filthy waves in the sky disappeared by a small half. The broken flesh and blood watered the snow, as if telling the terrifying lethality of the Noxian blood cavalry. But this feast of extreme killing has just begun. The Noxian blood cavalry, led by Kled, rushed into a slaughterhouse, holding heavy lances in their hands, stringing up broken corpses one by one, until they crushed and rushed through the camp of the bears. Gilu gilu! The desert dragon lizard Scare screamed, his copper bell-like eyes tightly closed, and Kled on his back controlled the direction of advance, and continued to rush into the rear of the Winter Claw's heavy infantry formation. The cold swords chopped on the scales like black silk metal without any damage. But those swords and weapons broke into gaps. Die! Kled saw his beloved partner screaming, swung the silver axe in his hand, and directly chopped to death the Winter Claw heavy infantry along the way. The sprayed blood soaked his body, but it seemed to stimulate him. Kled opened his only intact fierce left eye, filled with anger and murderous intent. He looked at the panicked Winter Claw heavy infantry in front of him and went completely crazy. The silver axe in his hand swung quickly, like a meat grinder that had started, setting off a crazy and terrifying killing. No one can be as eager to kill as Kled. The courage is as strong as iron, and the anger is overwhelming. Huo Jixing followed Kled's charging steps closely, and his red eyes seemed to be stained with blood, which looked a bit scary. The heavy cavalry lance in his hand had been discarded long ago, and it had lost its functionality after connecting too many corpses. As a last resort, he drew out the long knife at his waist and chopped it wantonly, taking the lives of the Winter Claw heavy infantry. Looking from the corner of his eye, Huo Jixing saw that the steel wave transformed by the Noxian blood cavalry behind him had shrunk a lot. Most of the remaining people also had more or less scars. The heavy cavalry charge was a tragic form of battle. It often brought victory, but it also put the soldiers in an extreme situation of life and death. Especially in this battlefield that almost turned into a bloody mill, there were too many bears and Winter Claw warriors. Many Noxian blood cavalry were dragged down by them in the middle of the charge and fell into a deadly situation. But the terrifying impact they brought also completely disrupted the Winter Claw formation. The balance of victory shifted to Noxus. Boy, can you charge again? Kled reached out to wipe the blood stains on the plush face, but unexpectedly, the dirty face became more hideous. Of course. Huo Jixing answered in a deep voice, waving the sharp long knife in his hand and cutting off the head of the Winter Claw heavy infantry. The Star of Constellation not only gave him abundant energy, but also the inherent Suzaka flowing fire feather clothes talent ability. The defensive effect is very outstanding. The red gold wings seemed to cover the whole body with armor. Including the heavy armor, the 2 layers of defense allowed him to be unscathed during the charge. Another important point is that he has been following behind Kled, and he has been taken care of by the boss's residual power, so he basically doesn't encounter any powerful enemies. Haha! Kled laughed loudly, looking at the red gold light covering Huo Jixing's body, waving the silver axe, and clearing the surrounding Winter Claw warriors. Then follow well, don't be alone. Kledrovskar and called out, ordering the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry to gather. The Noxian Scarlet Cavalry surging behind him bypassed Kled tacitly and readjusted the formation in the cleared battlefield around him. But in a moment, Kled led the Noxian Scarlet Cavalry again and launched a charge. They did not choose the battlefield of the Mammoth Riders and Ice Warriors, but continued to rush towards the Bears and Winter Claw Warriors. The focus of each battlefield is different. With the number of Noxian Scarlet Cavalry, even with Kled's command, it is somewhat unrealistic to attack the Mammoth Riders and Ice Warriors. Extraordinary power will deal them a heavy blow. It is far better to continue to disrupt the battlefield between the Bears and the Winter Claw Warriors. The bloody wave rises again. This time, facing the chaotic Winter Claw formation, the Noxian Blood Cavalry faced it more calmly. They seemed to be completely trapped in the killing, swinging the sharp blades in their hands wantonly, harvesting the lives of the Winter Claw Warriors and the Bears, and the shouts and roars in their mouths shocked the enemies along the way. Stinky Lizard, kill the ugly big guy together. Kled looked at the bear monster crawling in front of him, which was as strong as a hill, and grinned. He stretched out his left hand and pulled the bear trap from his waist. The sharp spikes reflected the metal light, and then aimed at the neck of the bear monster and put it directly on. Gully Lurch! Hearing Kled's shout, the dragon lizard screamed. Skarl, who seemed timid and panicked, moved his feet and exerted force instantly, dragging the bear monster to the ground. Crack! Die! Krae breathed in the bloody smell in the air, driving Skarl and rushing past the side of the bear monster. The axe in his hand swung rapidly, wrapped in a rain of blood, and cut off the hideous and ugly head of the bear monster. Charge! After crossing the body of the bear monster, Krae pulled the reins tightly, yelled, and drove Skarl to continue running wildly. The bears and monsters who intended to gather together looked at the surging steel wave and fell into chaos again. The shrill howls, mixed with the roars of the Noxian Blood Cavalry, composed the tragic ballads of the bears. Boom! Boom! Thunder exploded under the dim sky. Huo Jixing waved the long knife in his hand and slaughtered the bears fleeing on both sides. When he heard the thunder, for some reason, a bad premonition emerged from the depths of his heart. Suzaku red eyes and fire pupils. The red glow filled his pupils, and Huo Jixing looked up at the dark sky where the thunder disappeared, with a solemn expression. He saw that behind the dark clouds, there were dense dark purple thunders, outlining a hazy phantom that stretched through the sky and the earth. Indistinctly, he seemed to see multiple thunder eyes open, overlooking the bears being slaughtered. Just as he wanted to continue to observe in depth, a huge dark purple thunder, like a sharp claw, crossed the sky. Huo Jixing groaned, his body trembled, and he almost fell off the armored warhorse. Volibear's lightning consciousness is reviving. He suppressed the dizziness in his mind and squinted his eyes. Blood overflowed from his red pupils, completely dyeing his vision red. Could it be that we slaughtered too many bears and monsters and attracted his attention? Huo Jixing looked at the blood-stained world and saw strands of deep purple lightning and thunder jumping and dancing, gradually filling the battlefield. Then he realized something and immediately looked down at his long sword and the armor covering his warhorse. I saw tiny static sparks begin to appear on the long sword and armor. Not only him, looking around. He saw tiny static sparks appearing on the armor, swords, and axes of Kled and the Noxian Blood Cavalry, covering everyone. The arcs of electricity seemed to have spirituality, jumping and wandering between weapons and armor. Huo Jixing felt cold in his heart, an invisible fear enveloped his soul. Lord Krae, leave here, we need to leave here. Huo Jixing could no longer bear it, and whipped the warhorse under his crotch and rushed to Krae's side. Whoosh! The silver axe fell and barely stopped on Huo Jixing's forehead, blowing his black hair and bloody face. Boy, what are you doing? Krae, who was enjoying the killing, looked at Huo Jixing who was rushing over with a ferocious look, and his only eye was full of anger. Huo Jixing's eyelids twitched, as if he was stared at by an ancient beast, and his hair stood up all over his body. Leave here, we must leave here. He resisted the chill in his heart and quickly pointed to the static sparks in the air and the arcs jumping on the weapons and armor. Volibear is reviving. Chapter 82. Damn it, Volibear! Hearing Huo Jixing's prompt, Kled looked at the static sparks filling the air, then looked up at the thunder-filled sky, and spat blood on the ground. In the long history of the Freljord, Volibear represents all unstoppable forces. He is the roar of thunder, the rolling thunderstorm, and Valhir. At the same time it is desolate, a giant bear that has been subjected to thousands of swords and spears, and the towering figure of Wolregard. Cled clenched the silver axe in his hand and could clearly feel the wild magic power surging in the battlefield. He looked at the chaotic bears, and the murderous intention in his heart gradually receded. These bears had completely lost their minds and began to kill crazily without distinguishing between friends and foes. Especially those spirit bear monsters, they seemed to be controlled by the thunder consciousness, their eyes burned with blue fire, they opened their huge mouths, spit out filthy brown mucus, and swallowed up the broken corpses on the ground. Not only dead things, but also living things cannot avoid it. They limp, crawl, and stagger forward, like hunters, preying on Winter's Claw warriors and Noxian soldiers. Everyone is ordered to leave the battlefield. Cled suppressed his inner uneasiness, raised the silver axe in his hand, killed the charging bears, and roared loudly. The Noxian Scarlet Cavalry also noticed something unusual on the battlefield. They looked at the arcs of electricity dancing on their armored weapons, feeling fear rising in their hearts. After hearing Cled's order, they quickly followed Scar's footsteps and left the battlefield on the road of blood. Ta-ta! 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 At the edge of the battlefield, the remaining Noxian Scarlet Cavalry looked at the filthy waves that were out of control with horrified expressions. Sejuani is going crazy. Cled looked away, looked at Huo Jixing, and said with a smile. Her people, her blood alliance, are becoming sacrifices for Volibear's resurrection. Huo Jixing's eyes were red as he looked at the increasingly dark sky, where raging thunder spread across the battlefield. Aren't we going to notify General Darius? No need. Cled stood on Scar's head, a smile appearing on his blood-stained plush face. Don't underestimate the hand of Noxus, he is a symbol of the Empire's power. Klee turned around and looked at Huo Jixing curiously, aren't you tired? It's not bad, I'm energetic. Huo Jixing shrugged his shoulders and wiped away the dried blood on the blade with his hand. After this chop, there were many gaps on the blade. We still have things to do. Cled nodded. These Ursines are too dirty. We can't let these guys devour too many Noxian soldiers. In the frozen battlefield, Darius was half kneeling on the ground, with the black cutter in his hand standing upright in front of him. The ferocious armor had been stained with blood, dripping to the ground along the edge of the armor. There was frost on his wrists and greaves, hindering his steps. At the same time, the fragments of violence embedded in the armor were also somewhat dull, covered with blue frost. But Darius seemed oblivious, staring at Sejuani directly in front of him with red eyes. Compared to him, Sejuani was much better, but Steelmane had a few ferocious blood marks on her huge body. Victory still belongs to Winter's Claw. Sejuani looked coldly as she looked at Darius, who was struggling to get up, and drove Steelmane over, the ultimate ice chain flail in her hand showing a little blood. Haha! Darius chuckled. Now is not the time to discuss victory, but whether your Winter's Claw tribe can still exist. He looked at the thunder-filled sky and realized why Sejuani didn't choose to attack with all her strength. She is afraid of the resurrected old god. The immortal Thunder Volibear. Now, he seems to be recovering and coming back. Following Darius' gaze, Sejuani's face suddenly turned pale and filled with anger. Volibear, you betrayed the covenant. She saw under the dim sky, the out-of-control bears and monsters were killing the Winter's Claw warriors. Facing the sudden backstab, most of the fighting Winter's Claw warriors died immediately, without any time to make any resistance. And the wave of death is spreading crazily along with the filthy waves. Warbears never listen to orders. Their bloodlust will spread and they will eat us up and wipe us clean. Udir's warning words rang in his ears. Sejuani didn't believe it earlier, thinking that she was the war mother of Winter's Claw and that she initiated the war. As long as she says stop, both the Winter's Claw warriors and the bears will stop. But now, the truth is unfolding before our eyes. Sejuani became completely angry. She turned around and glanced at the swaying Darius fiercely, and then drove the Steelmane towards the filthy waves. The resurrection of the immortal thunder completely disrupted her plan. And make winning irrelevant. She must now ensure that her tribe leaves safely and continues this war. Haha, victory belongs to Noxus. Darius suppressed the pain in his body, looked at Sejuani who was walking away, and said with a soft smile. However, he also saw that the Noxian array was also being eroded by the bears, and he immediately raised the black cutter and waved it. Boom! 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 The high and fierce drumbeats gradually became softer, and the Noxian soldiers who were holding on in the bloody battlefield heard it and began to slowly withdraw. Captain Farron and Shinehorn Olo led their own regiments to intercept. In addition, the roaring steel crossbows and black arrow rain quickly changed their targets and sniped at the bears and bear monsters who were chasing them. Kled led Huojixing and the Noxian blood cavalry and began to wander around, cutting off the claws stretched out by the bears. Even so, some Noxian soldiers did not have time to escape and were deeply trapped in the filthy waves of the bears. In comparison, most of the Noxian soldiers who returned to the camp safely. The warriors of the Winter Claw were not so lucky. In this bloody battle, they almost mixed with the bears. And the loss of control of the bears instantly caused heavy losses to the Winter Claw tribe. Hee, look who this is. Kled Rodsker and walked to Darius, who returned to the camp, saying with a smirk. Oh, it's Darius, but your appearance. Tisk tisk. Darius didn't care about Kled's attitude. When he saw the Rune Weaver coming over, he immediately raised his arms and let the other party strip off the armor that was almost embedded in his muscles. Are you crazy? You actually used Tyranny Fragment. Kled saw the bloody red light on the hideous armor, and his eyes were full of murderous light. He held the silver axe in his hand and pointed it at the black-robed mage and the Rune Weaver. Lord Kled. We. The black-robed mage trembled in his heart and wanted to explain immediately. Okay, it's none of their business. Darius came over. His majestic and resolute face was a little pale. He patted Kled on the shoulder and signaled him to put down the silver axe. Now let's see how the Winter Claw can deal with the resurrected Undying Thunder. Chapter 84. In the blood-stained snow battlefield. The howling of the cold wind, the strong smell of rust filled the air. Accompanied by the roar of thunder, the wild roar of the bears suppressed many noises. They completely lost their minds, their filthy bodies were entangled with static sparks, their hair stood up, and they pounced on the unprepared Winter Claw warriors beside them. At the same time, the thunder rumbled in the dark sky, like the sound of horns from ancient times, like the wild sacrifices of countless devout believers, and a thunder phantom that penetrated the sky and the earth emerged from the clouds. From a distance, multiple deep purple eyes were reflected on the dome, and their indifferent eyes overlooked the blood-stained battlefield. Perhaps the bloody slaughter between the Noxian warband and the Winter Claw tribe was too tragic. Like a crimson blanket, covered with flesh and corpses on the endless battlefield, it attracted the attention of the immortal Thunder Volibear. In the ancient times of Fruljord, Volibear liked war and killing, and enjoyed the blood sacrifice brought by the bears. This would make his power more and more inflated. And now on the battlefield, the bloody killing and the corpses filling the trenches made Volibear, who was recovering, lose control of his consciousness. He smelled the blood in the air and called for the deep purple thunder in the sky, wanting to taste the blood sacrifice brought by the bears. Volibear. Suddenly, a furious voice sounded, suppressing the roar of the bears. In the distance, the furious Sejuani rode on steel mane, waving the true ice flail in her hand, and rushed towards the rampaging bears. Boom! The steel chains rang, the blood-stained chain hammer pierced the air, and the boiling blue frost descended on the battlefield. In an instant, the surging filthy waves seemed to be attacked by the cold wave of winter, and the blue frost froze everything in the world. Directly condensed the raging bears in front of it into lifelike ice sculptures. Frozen field. The swinging true ice flail, wrapped with the power of Sejuani's icy bloodline, is like a huge wave sweeping over, engulfing the raging bears and freezing them in the frozen field. Huff! Huff! The steel mane covered with black bristles was panting white air, like a tank's body, running wildly on the battlefield. It stared at the blue ice sculptures in front of it, shook its head, adjusted its direction, and smashed the ice sculptures with its sharp fangs. Crack! 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 With the swinging of the frost-covered true ice flail and the collision of the sharp fangs, the ice sculptures collapsed one by one, turned into ice cubes, and scattered into a mess. Sejuani was bathed in the blue frost in the sky, her eyes looked coldly at the bear spirit monsters in the filthy waves, and continued to swing the true ice flail in her hand. Obviously, the slaughter in front of her was far from satisfying Sejuani's anger. She almost sacrificed her entire tribe to the Undying Thunder Volibear. Clang! Static electricity sparks danced on the claws, intercepting the swinging true ice flails. But the tremendous force brought by the hammer made the Lord of the Hunt retreat continuously, stepping out deep pits on the ground where blood flowed like a river. Fine snowflakes danced, and the thick blood filled the air. Are you stopping the Lord's resurrection? The Lord of the Hunt wore a huge crow feather hood and bearskin cloak, and looked at Sejuani with cold eyes. You broke the covenant. Sejuani stared at the lord of the hunt in front of her with hatred, and the true ice flails in her hand glowed brightly. Storm and wild bear? Just a liar. Boom. The dark purple thunder fell and hit the ground, and snowflakes and dust flew up and landed on Steel Mane. Winter Claw Warmother, you are blaspheming God. Get out of here. Volibear running dog. Sejuani roared, riding on Steel Mane, swinging the true ice flail in her hand, and rushed towards the hunting lord with all her strength. Behind her, the azure frost was diffused, like a storm, gathering on the true ice flail in her hand. Bang! The solid claws and the true ice flail collided again. The static sparks that filled her arms and the blooming azure frost were like fire and ice, melting quickly. Unfortunately, the hunting lord underestimated the Winter Claw Warmother. Sejuani not only possessed the blood of ice, but also possessed extremely terrifying power. Snap! 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 The hunting lord's solid claws filled with static sparks only lasted for a second, and then broke like a pruned branch. Then the true ice flail hit his chest like a giant hammer, and it was directly dented. Boom! The strong body of the lord of the hunt, like a bear man, flew backwards, fell on the bloody battlefield, and rolled. Unable to withstand a single blow. Sejuani rode on Steel Mane with a violent look on her face, looking down at the lord of the hunt with a broken arm and a sunken chest, and was just about to kill him. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, thousands of thunders fell from the dim sky. Even if Sejuani waved the true ice flail and condensed an ice storm, it could not hold on under the raging thunder and slowly dissipated. Bang! The dark purple thunder danced wildly, turning into sharp spears, hitting Sejuani accurately. The diffused static electricity sparks surrounded Steel Mane's body, causing it to tremble unconsciously, and the thick and sharp hair stood upside down. Sejuani fell to the ground, her helmet fell off, her long grey hair fluttered in the wind, but this could not suppress the piercing murderous intent in her eyes. Volibear! Sejuani looked at the thunder phantom in the dark sky and gritted her teeth. From the multiple deep purple eyes, she saw the wild light, and saw the corpses of countless tribesmen turned into blood and nutrients, melting into thunder and lightning. Ahem! Ahem! The hunting animal lord slowly stood up. The crow feather hood and bearskin cloak he was wearing looked tattered, like strips of cloth covering his downy body. But surrounded by thunder and lightning, his physical injuries were rapidly recovering. The broken arms were glued together in the electric light, the sunken chest was gradually healing, and the broken bones and flesh on the body were being reshaped. You can't kill the storm. I rise again clothed in thunder. The hunting lord stared into Sejuani's cold eyes, opened his hands, and bathed in the falling thunderstorm. Storm, rage. With the high and violent roar, the hunting animal lord seemed to be unable to bear it any longer. Grey-white hair sprouted from the flesh and bones, fangs appeared at the corners of the mouth, and the fierce lightning eyes stared at Sejuani, and thunder and lightning with terrifying power lingered around the sharp claws. I can kill you once, but I can kill you 1,000 times. Sejuani tied her hair into a tight knot and mounted Steel Mane again. She could feel Steel Mane's fear of facing thunder, but there was no choice now. Sejuani leaned forward in the saddle, inserted her fingers into Steel Mane's black bristles, and whispered to Steel Mane, "Man, this is our fight. We must lead the tribe out of here." Boom boom. Boom boom. This Juvisk wild boar with sharp tusks let out a low roar, stamped its thick hooves heavily on the ground, and started running. Sejuani clamped her legs together, swung the perfect ice chain flail, and rushed towards the attacking lord of the hunting animals. Those who stop us will be defeated. Blood splattered everywhere. The blue frost is like a huge wave rushing wildly. Under the leadership of Sejuani and Steel Mane, they savagely pulled a hole from thunderstorm like a sharp blade. The swung perfect ice chain flail turned into a blue-horned dragon and swam in the thunderstorm, shattering the hunter lord's claws and breaking his healed arm. Then it was wrapped with extremely terrifying power, crushing the ugly and ferocious bear man's face. Click! 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 The horrifying sound of fractures sounded again. The hunting animal lord wailed, his facial bones were shattered, his arms were broken, and countless pieces of flesh and blood sprayed out and condensed in the frost. He wanted to resist, jumped up on the spot, and rushed towards Sejuani. But the sharp fangs of the Steel Mane pierced his bear man body, swinging him viciously and knocking him to the snow. The thick front hooves fell immediately, crushing all the bones and flesh. Just as Sejuani trampled the hunting lord wantonly, deafening thunder echoed through the sky. Above the grey clouds, an almost solid thunder phantom lowered its wild gaze. Daughter of War, you! Are you fighting me? Chapter 85. Above the chaotic and dark sky, thousands of deep purple thunder exploded, and the deafening thunder resounded through the sky, which was breathtaking. Looking from a distance, the boundless lightning looked like a thunder bear with its huge mouth open, intending to engulf everyone in the battlefield. The Hunter Lord, whose body was shattered, seemed to be reflecting on his past, and he opened his chest with the remaining broken claws. Wow! Wow! The fur on the chest cracked, the flesh and blood rolled, a large amount of sticky blood spurted out, and the beating heart and other organs could be faintly seen. The blood that gushes out seems to have spirituality. When struck by lightning, it turns into blood mist and rises, overlooking the bloody battlefield. When the deafening thunder sounded, the bears and monsters who were killing wantonly stopped and looked at the dark sky with thunderous eyes, looking at the almost solid phantom of the thunder bear. They made the same movements as the hunting lords, using their claws to cut open their chests. The gushing viscous blood infects the thunderstorm, adding a strong smell of rust to the boundless lightning field. I pave my road with blood and bones. The ancient low words suppressed the roaring thunder and entered everyone's consciousness. Sejuani looked up at the dim sky filled with thunder and lightning. The terrifying pressure was like a mountain, weighing down her body. She felt like all her words were erupting out of her eyeballs, but to no avail. Between the deep purple thunder and lightning, the diffuse blood mist melted into the phantom. Visible to the naked eye, the muscles, hair, and bones began to solidify, and you could also see endless lightning connecting them, gradually turning into a giant thunder bear that stood on the clouds and stood in the sky. Daughter of War, embrace me. I give you wild power and crush the enemies in front of you. The immortal Mad Thunder Volibear seemed to step out of the thunder. He raised his arms wrapped with lightning and covered with grey hair, as if hugging the war mother of the Winter's Claw tribe in front of him. Storm and Wild Bear! Put away your aloof attitude, I will never give in to you. Sejuani straightened her body and stared directly at the thunder bear above the sky with cold eyes. She would never believe Volibear's words again. The backstabbing behavior in the war caused her Blood Alliance clan to be slaughtered by the bears, and she was under heavy pressure to succumb all the time. It is silently telling the story of the destruction and conquest brought about by Volibear's recovery and return. Follow me, and we will make the sky collapse. Volibear lowered his multiple thunder eyes and stared at Sejuani. The thunder and lightning beside him jumped, and he assumed an offensive posture, as if it was her last chance. Don't even think about it. Sejuani gritted her teeth, and the perfect ice chain flail in her hand turned a bright blue. You have violated our covenant and you still want me to surrender to you. Boom! 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 The dark sky suddenly split open, and endless thunder and lightning flashed with dazzling light, bringing fear and helplessness to everyone. In the bloody battlefield, the surviving Winter's Claw warriors and Blood Alliance clans could no longer bear it. They prostrated themselves, knelt down in the bloody battlefield, and worshipped the Thunder Bear on the clouds. Just when Sejuani was under the terrible pressure brought by Volibear, Udur with disheveled black hair suddenly appeared in the bloody battlefield as if he had crossed the distance of space. He ignored the thunder and storm, crossed Sejuani, and stood in front of her. You have violated our covenant, bear spirit. Udur went into battle shirtless and roared at the Thunder Bear, his body filled with brilliant light. Child of humanity, do you want to stop me too? The sound of thunder echoed in Udur's consciousness, confusing his thoughts, seeming to make him lose his mind. You are torturing yourself. Don't suppress your talents, don't reject the power that belongs to me. Udur straightened his body, his eyes glowed with blue light, and he used all his willpower to resist Volibear's temptation. Fortunately, after his meditation just now, he could barely resist the erosion of Volibear's thunder consciousness. You have violated our covenant, spirit of the bear. Udur repeated as his form began to change. The immortal eagle, the clever lynx, the resolute wild boar, etc., and more than a dozen other animal spirits. However, under the pressure of the thunderstorm, these animal spirits could not persist for too long, and they began to distort and disappear, faintly showing Udur's human posture. It wasn't until he transformed into the shape of a spirit bear that he could barely withstand the terrifying pressure brought by the thunder. Udur controlled his body perfectly, becoming exactly the same as the giant monster above his head. Human child, are you using my state to fight me? A different color appeared in Volibear's thunderous eyes, as if he had awakened from chaos. However, there was too much blood-colored mist in the thunderstorm, and Volibear fell into chaos again, with only his wild nature remaining in his eyes. No. Udur shook his head slightly, looking at the bloody battlefield from the corner of his eye. Sejuani's wild boar, her eyes, her people, her mission. I must protect these. Fire walking rush. Udur roared at the thunder bear on the clouds. His animal spirit state began to gradually change, blazing fireworks emerged in the thunderstorm, and there seemed to be a giant sheep with high horns stepping onto the battlefield. Finally, Udur's form became the spirit of flame, furnace, and anvil. At the same time, he is also the nemesis of the immortal thunder Volibear. Boom! 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 Volibear looked down at the beast spirit of the human below, and his multiple deep purple eyes overflowed with murderous intent as if it were real, and the endless sound of thunder exploded in the sky. Human! Volibear was about to speak. But the red giant sheep spirit that soared into the sky broke through the thunderstorm with its hard and ferocious horns. In an instant, the raging thunder and lightning and the light of the flame furnace were like magma eruption, and the surging and terrifying energy waves soared into the sky, disturbing the clouds and piercing the dark sky. The diffuse blood-colored mist evaporated, and a large number of corpses turned into fragments. The confrontation between two different consciousnesses filled the blood-colored battlefield inside and outside. The area where Udur was located suddenly sunken, and the pale snowflakes turned into fine particles. The dust in the sky danced and rose into the air, covering the sky and the earth. Sejuani stretched out her right hand and blocked her eyes to block the invasion of the sandstorm. Her cold eyes revealed anxiety, and she looked at the center of the battle nervously. She didn't expect Udur to stand up for her and face the resurrected Volibear alone, and it seemed successful. That was the storm and wild bear, the god of the ancient times of Freljord. Even if Volibear had not fully revived, but only the wild consciousness descended, it was not something that ordinary extraordinary people could challenge. The waiting time was not long. In the gradually disappearing thunderstorm, Udur, bathed in the flames of the furnace, was faintly seen walking out slowly. Don't come over. Seeing Sejuani riding on steel mane and trying to get close to him, Udur waved his hand and spoke weakly. Looking closely, you can see many tiny lightning bolts in the fiery furnace, like purple snakes, moving along Udur's body, leaving traces of scorch marks. Leave here first, Noxus is still eyeing us. Hearing this, Sejuani looked at the remaining tribal warriors and blood clans gathered around, her eyes low. These tribesmen with expressions of fear and panic looked extremely miserable. The thick fur was badly damaged, and the bone blades in their hands were full of gaps. What made her even more uncomfortable was the number of survivors. Although they had the help of the Iceborne warriors, the bears moved too fast and buried too many Winter Claw warriors and blood clans. Moving her eyes, Sejuani looked at the bloody battlefield under her feet. On the cracked land, countless corpses were densely packed, curled up in deformed shapes. The bodies were frozen stiff, the heads were broken, and the organs were exposed outside, forming a suffocating picture and a strong smell of rust. Sejuani clenched the true ice veil in her hand, looked back at the Noxian camp with fluttering flags in the distance, and rode on steel mane to command the Winter Claw tribe to leave the bloody battlefield. Under the setting sun, the sturdy body looked a little weak and embarrassed. The defeat in the war not only prevented the Winter Claw tribe from plundering enough supplies, but also had to face the upcoming winter cold wave in Freljord. Noxian camp, on the high platform tower. Darius looked at the Winter Claw tribe that was gradually leaving, exhaled lightly, and did not choose to pursue the victory. He looked at the thunder that was gradually dissipating in the dark sky, and the remaining flames, and remained silent. Undying thunder Volibear. Hidden flame of the mountain Orn. The ancient gods of Freljord are reviving and returning. This is not too good news for the current Noxian Empire. Fortunately, the punishment of the old gods will haunt the Winter Claw tribe and Sejuani. This means that in the next few years, there will be no threat to the northern border of the Noxus Empire. Darius suppressed his inner thoughts, looked at Kled and Skarl, and said softly, "Thank you for coming. It's rare to hear you say that." Kled seemed to be indifferent, but his plush face was raised, like a victorious general, with a sense of pride. "And you, Huo Jixing, you have completed the task well." Darius looked at Huo Jixing sideways with an admiring look. "General, this is what I should do." Huo Jixing retracted his distant gaze and saluted. "Haha." Darius laughed and patted Huo Jixing on the shoulder, and a touch of blood appeared on his pale and weak face. Flags fluttered, drums thundered. The Noxus camp began to put away the bloody war claws and lick their wounds. The final outcome of this war was somewhat unexpected. Huo Jixing didn't know if Darius had a backup plan to face Sejuani's full-strength explosion and Udur who controlled the spirit of flame, hearth, and anvil. But victory belongs to Noxus. He looked at the Noxian warbands resting in the camp and suddenly realized that this was the reason why the Empire's territory expanded year after year. It was the Noxian warbands that fought everywhere, avenged every grievance, and would not return until they won. They created the glory of the Noxian Empire. But Darkwill's willful behavior caused these Noxian warbands to suffer heavy losses and lost many elite soldiers. Huo Jixing looked at Darius who was leaving, as well as Kled and Wilson who were accompanying him. The victory of the Second Battle of Fruljord defended the glory of the Empire. Soon, this Noxian hand will return to the capital to meet Swain, who succeeded in the coup. The Tri-Fairy Council. Huo Jixing thought of the three-person council in his memory, representing foresight, force, and cunning respectively. They will bring different destinies to the Noxus Empire. Well, is it snowing? Huo Jixing was about to walk down the watchtower when he saw snowflakes floating in the sky. He looked back at the snow-covered Ironthorn Mountains and the bloody battlefield, and the figures of Eric and others flashed before his eyes. When you look up at the snowflakes in the sky, she will definitely take you home. Huo Jixing remembered the Noxus proverb that Eric had said, sighed lightly, and a faint sadness appeared in his eyes. He grabbed the falling snowflakes, gently crushed them, and then threw them up casually, letting the cold wind blow. Winter will eventually pass, and warm spring is about to bloom. Chapter 86. The first volume is officially finished, I think it's okay. Haha. Haha. Sakura first explains that this story is purely fictional. This story is purely fictional. This story is purely fictional. All the contents of the first volume are fantasy creation based on the League of Legends universe, and borrowed the settings of the Legend of Runeterra. The timeline of the story. It was after the failure of the first Fruljord campaign, during the Swain coup. At the same time, the Annie incident was inserted to foreshadow the subsequent story, which will not be mentioned for the time being. During the update period, Sakura also read most of the comments and saw many people's opinions. In terms of talents, Sakura's idea is to use the four spirits of heaven to represent the stars, which is mentioned in the article. Many people proposed to use the talents of the League of Legends directly. Here is a solemn explanation, the talents in the League of Legends actually refer to the runes of the Valoran continent. After the Rune War, most of the runes on the Valoran continent have owners. The protagonist certainly cannot get it out of thin air, so the star spirit talents are used. And in the power system of the League of Legends universe, the star spirit power is higher than the rune power. In this way, the protagonist's power growth can better participate in high-level battles. As for creating a rune by himself, well, to be honest, Sakura's level is not enough, and she can't write it well. In the end, it may be even weirder than the Protoss. And in terms of extraordinary knowledge, why do you owe favors? Because in the Western Middle Ages or the feudal era of China, knowledge, especially special knowledge, is a very scarce resource and will not be given to others for no reason. This is also the development point of the story later. There are also many comments on the character change of the protagonist. From the peaceful mentality of today's society to adapting to the chaotic and disorderly war, the writing is a bit sloppy. This is because Sakura's own writing is not good, and I can only say that I will learn more later. At the end of the volume, Sakura used a lot of chapters to describe the Second Battle of Fruljord, resulting in a clear lack of scenes for the protagonist's appearance. This is because the current strength of the protagonist is far inferior to that of many heroes. Not to mention the revival of the immortal Mad Thunder Volibear. Sakura will pay attention to this aspect later, and when the protagonist's strength grows up, he will participate in more events. Finally. Chapter 87. Citizens of Noxus, I bring news from the capital. Celebrate! The hand of Noxus has returned, working alongside our new leader. The major nobles have also united around them, and the glorious empire has entered a new era. It is widely known that to this day, from distant Shurima to Ionia across the sea, the countless wars started by Brown Dark will have all come to an end. Our treasury will no longer be drained by uncertain battles with uncertain outcomes. Our warriors no longer need to make unnecessary sacrifices for the sake of fame. The gold of Noxus, the blood of Noxus, are the treasures of the Empire, and Jericho Swain has sworn to return them to you, the people of the Empire. During the campaign in the north, the brave General Darius received an order to retreat. But he did not obey meekly. Instead, he led his entire battle group to defeat the Winter's Claw clan and return to the capital with glory. Because the hand of Noxus' first duty is to be loyal to the empire, not to the crown. Even if times have changed and things have changed, he can legitimately and reasonably question the orders he received and the authority that issued them. It was announced to the public that General Darius had met with General Swain. Darius had no objection to the announcement, because he finally learned that the coup that overthrew Brown Darkwill was just and legal, and that Swain's move was also to protect Noxus. The overall situation. Long live Jericho Swain! Save the Empire from fire and water, save the building from collapse. Under the protection of Darius and his warband, representatives of the powerful families gathered to hear Swain's plans for the future of Noxus. All those who swore allegiance on behalf of themselves and their families, regardless of age or gender, were forgiven by the Commander-in-Chief, and any previous acts of disobedience or rebellion they had committed were forgiven. From now on, everyone is a noble and honorable servant of the Lord Commander and should not be harmed. The Lord Commander, possessing infinite wisdom and kindness, extended tolerance even to those who rejected his kindness. They had 7 full days to settle their affairs within the empire, hand over their lands and titles, and leave Noxus forever. If you disobey orders and stay behind forcibly, you will be deemed to have given up your life, and a public reckoning will begin again at the Noxcali arena. Let it be known that from now on, every Noxian should be treated equally, distinguished by their individual abilities. In addition, Jericho Swain and various noble houses will resolutely resist the status quo of incompetence and nepotism, and eradicate the cancer that has plagued Darkwill for decades. However, the former commander was not a bad person, and Swain would not record him in history with a bad name. Rather, he is fierce in appearance but cowardly in ambition, allowing other forces to secretly manipulate him. That's right, friends. At the heart of our great empire lies a force of decay. It has never stopped for hundreds of years. At first glance, it looks like a lovely flower, but its roots are twisting and spreading in the dark. That's it, friends. That's it. Jericho Swain will destroy all those who use Noxus for personal gain. He will uproot this evil, this dead rose of thorns, uproot it. We hereby declare that all members of this force and their allies are enemies of the Empire, and all law-abiding citizens have the obligation to impose sanctions within their capabilities. Only by working together can we achieve victory. Throughout the country, everyone should be suspicious. This evil force has been at work long before Brown Darkwill came to power, and even the greatest kings and heroes of the Noxian era have not been spared, even dating back to the Rune Wars. Indeed, our beloved Lord Commander has heard the concerns among the nobles. Since anyone could fall for this corrupting force, what about him? In response to this extreme situation, he has decreed that Noxus should not be ruled by a single man. Instead, 3 people rule together. He referred to the great legacy passed down by the ancient tribe, the foresight of Nox Eddy, the force of Nox Cree, and the cunning of Nox Tally, and founded the Trifari 3-person parliament. No one can monopolize the power, and everyone is committed to the pillar of strength they represent, so that Noxus can remain prosperous and victorious. Finally, let the public know that after in-depth discussions with noble friends, the Lord Commander has reached an agreement with the leaders of the Assassin Guild. Together with Swain and Darius, they will gain a seat on the council and send a faceless man as a representative to protect the empire from the threat of conspiracy within itself. Go ahead, citizens. Spread the word of the announcement to everyone. The greatest era of Noxus has yet to come. As equal and unified people, we must unite under the goal and glory and rise again. Chapter 88. Noxus Empire, Central Hinterland. On the vast flat dark green plain, a majestic capital city with unfathomable height, like a lying ancient giant, is located in the most eye-catching position. Looking from a distance, the dark grey city walls seem to penetrate the clouds, blocking the prying eyes of all forces. Countless red imperial flags hung along the wall. As the winter wind blows, endless waves of red ripple. This is the capital of Noxus. Immortal Fortress. It is older than the Empire, and rumor has it that it was the terrifying Wraith Mordekaiser who ordered its construction. But now many parts of it have been completely razed and gradually rebuilt over the past few hundred years, gradually forming the current capital of Noxus. Outside the walls of the capital, there are many high and low buildings, some of which are lower than the surface and hidden under the ground. They are the slums that exist in the capital of Noxus, the lowest level of darkness. Stop looking, DeWitt. In the hill camp, Huo Jixing walked to the raised boulder, patted DeWitt on the shoulder, and said, "The latest news is that the suppression in the capital has almost ended. I guess if we wait a little longer, we can enter and leave the capital. After the war with the Winter's Claw tribe ended, under the orders of General Darius, they spent a lot of time at the northern border of the empire to prevent Sejuani from suddenly returning and attacking border cities. The end result is time wasted for no reason. But it is not without its benefits. The battle groups that have just experienced the war have been given sufficient rest time and their combat strength remains intact. General Darius then received an order to retreat, signed by Jericho Swain. It is hoped that Darius will lead the Northland War Group and quickly return to the Immortal Fortress to protect the nobles troubled by the unrest. Although Swain completed a one-night coup, there are still many great nobles in the Immortal Fortress. They began to become restless, and many people coveted the position of leader of Noxus. Afterwards, Huo Jixing and his team members received military orders and followed General Darius and the Northland Battle Group through Noxtera and returned to the capital of Noxus. Perhaps it was a protest from the nobles, or maybe it was Swain's compromise. In short, of the returning Northland battle groups, only a small number of battle groups entered the Immortal Fortress and were responsible for martial law and control of traffic arteries, while most of the battle groups were stationed outside the high walls. Huo Jixing and his team members arrived at the Noxian camp on the hill. Before leaving the northern border, he originally wanted to say goodbye to the Gregorys and see if he could see the newborn Anne. Unfortunately, the subsequent battlefield processing took a lot of time. Coupled with Swain's order to withdraw, he had to follow the military order and come outside the Noxus capital. There is also this Kui-Fuli announcement, do you want to take a look? Huo Jixing placed the grey-white paper in his hand in front of DeWitt's eyes. Kui-Farli announcement. DeWitt retracted his distant gaze with a puzzled expression. He took the grey paper in front of him and read it carefully. After a moment, DeWitt's eyes fell on the last line of the announcement and he murmured softly. Citizen Wilson brought it here, the information is very reliable. Huo Jixing looked at the stacked buildings outside the dark grey wall in the distance with a faint look in his eyes. The slums of the Immortal Fortress, the darkness beneath the prosperity. It represents hunger and poverty, disease and plague. It is also the birthplace of DeWitt. Most of the people at the bottom living in the slums do not have Noxian citizenship. They can only rely on their own physical labor to obtain meager food and some space to survive. After you receive the reward, you can take your family and enter the Immortal Fortress. After hearing Huo Jixing's words, the sadness in the depths of DeWitt's eyes dissipated a lot, and a touch of joy crept onto his face. Thank you, Captain 10th. Huo Jixing rubbed DeWitt's head. This young scout had spent a lot of time on the border of the north and had gained sufficient military exploits from the Fruljord battlefield. Coupled with citizenship, it is very easy to enter the interior of the Immortal Fortress. Go back first, and I'll ask in detail when Wilson comes next time. Huo Jixing took DeWitt back to the camp. Compared to the camps on the northern border, this camp guarding the Immortal Fortress is much stricter. As an elite scout of DeWitt, proof of access is required, as well as the signature of the centurion of the chapter. But with Huo Jixing with him, these cumbersome procedures were eliminated. The current Huo Jixing is no longer the same status as when he was a recruit. In addition to being a transcendent himself, his performance in the Second Battle of Fruljord and the military exploits gained from the victory made him deeply valued by Darius. Although the position is still Captain of 10, according to Wilson's wishes, he will receive a special reward from the Tri-Phalai Council. As for the specific reward content, it has not yet been determined. Passing through the subway gate, what comes into view are narrow, claustrophobic streets and densely packed stately houses. Even during the day, the environment seemed dark. The Immortal Fortress hundreds of years ago was an important military facility of the Noxus Empire, so the camp that defended it wouldn't seem too shabby. Walking along the narrow streets, you can see Noxian soldiers wearing armor and solemn expressions everywhere, who are always ready to fight. News of Swain's coup has spread throughout the Noxian Empire. Most of these Noxian soldiers stationed in the camp were brought by Darius from the Northern War Group, and they also admired Swain. Their mission was simple, to protect the capital to prevent anyone from causing trouble. When they saw Huo Jixing, the Noxian soldiers along the way saluted, their expressions somewhat fanatical. At the last moment of the Second Battle of Fruljord, the scene of Kled leading the Noxian blood cavalry to charge was deeply engraved in the souls of the Noxian soldiers who were fighting at that time. It must be said that Kled's charge performance was extremely brutal. But Huo Jixing's flaming killing was not weak either, and he won the support of many Noxian soldiers. Huo Jixing kept smiling, gradually getting used to his current star-like status, and he felt a little like a hero. In the center of the camp, a two-story dark grey building stood, with dense wall battlements at the eaves, and a solemn and dark style. Push open the door. Huo Jixing saw that the sword boy Hainai was carefully wiping the long sword in his hand, and he looked very focused. In the corner of the room, Corda sat on a wooden chair, leaning over to write something. The scout team that was once reorganized, only a few people in front of him were left. Century Captain. Seeing Huo Jixing, the sword boy Hainai stood up and said respectfully, and then smiled and greeted DeWitt. Has it been reforged? Huo Jixing looked at Hainai's long sword and reached out to take it. The long sword he used before was severely damaged in the Fruljord battle and could no longer be used, so he had to ask the quartermaster to reforge a new one according to the style. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sharp blade light flashed, leaving traces in the air. As expected of a Noxian craftsman, the craftsmanship is really good. Huo Jixing looked at the long sword in his hand that looked like a seedling. The blade was much heavier, more suitable for his current strength, but it did not affect his flexibility at all. There are flame patterns on the handle, extending from the handle to the end of the blade. I'll go rest first, call me for dinner. As if thinking of something, Huo Jixing put away the long sword, hung it on his waist, and walked to his room on the second floor. Chapter 89. Name, Huo Jixing. Essence, 280. Strength, 3.98. Constitution, 4.02. Agility, 4.08. Spirit, 4.92. Skills, Blade of Conquest, Wild Survival, Self-Observation, Photographic Memory. Talent, Suzaku, Fire of the South, Red Eyes, Suzaku Crying, Flowing Fire Feather Clothes. In the bedroom, Huo Jixing sat on the edge of the bed, with dark green data streams filling his eyes. Looking through the data panel, the values of his various physical attributes have reached about 4 points, and his mental attributes are the most prominent, approaching 5 points. And these data are silently telling that Huo Jixing's physical fitness is improving at an exaggerated speed. Although it is not as good as Kled and others, it is far beyond ordinary extraordinary people, and is not much worse than the previous ice warrior Georgie Giant Fist. Of course, this does not include the Suzaku talent. In addition, the number of essences is as high as 280 points. Most of the items were obtained by decomposing true ice weapons, and a small number were obtained by decomposing rune items. As for the above items, they were spoils of war after the victory of the war and the battlefield. The reason why there were so many was that Kled mentioned that his fire ability could melt true ice. After Darius knew about it, he deducted a small amount of military merit and handed over most of the true ice weapons on the battlefield to him. Huo Jixing's consciousness fell into the red Suzaku star map and appeared in the boundless starry sky. He looked up and observed the many flaming stars hanging in the starry sky. It was also hurried. The Willow Star and the Star Star were opened after sneaking into Fruljord. At that time, he was in the vortex of war and could only light up the stars in a hurry without further exploration and research. Later, when he repelled the Winter Claw tribe and rested at the northern border of Noxus, he began to study the Willow Star and the Star Star carefully, and benefited a lot from it. The curved head hangs like a willow, and the 3 stars are wine. After the Willow Star is lit, the golden red text deep in the brand consciousness will glow from time to time. Huo Jixing found out through in-depth understanding that the skill improvement brought by the Willow Star is not a one-time improvement. Rather, it is like the Nanli fire that changes physical fitness, which subtly improves his skill level. Although the skill level on the data panel still shows Conqueror's Blade, Huo Jixing feels that his skills are improving little by little, day by day, bit by bit. Perhaps the Grandmaster realm is not out of reach. There is also 3 stars for wine, he didn't know why, and after several attempts, he got nothing. But when he was drunk once, he got an unexpected reward, and he was very surprised. Here we have to mention the good luck brought by the furious knight Kled. After the victory of the Fruljord War, Kled was probably bored and rode Sker every day to find someone to drink. When he found that he couldn't find anyone, he began to pester Huo Jixing. But there was a clear rule in the camp, and Huo Jixing refused at first. Until Kiliai, as a general, issued an order to exempt himself from the punishment of drinking, everything went smoothly. Occasionally, after getting drunk, he waved his long sword and wanted to perform a sword dance, but he was surprised to find that he had entered a special state. When dancing with the sword, his skills were significantly improved. After sobering up, he immediately studied it carefully. He immediately felt the difference brought by the Liugzhu star. In the hazy state of drunkenness, Huo Jixing seemed to be transformed into a phantom of the vermilion bird, stretching his flaming wings in the boundless starry sky, and his golden beak lightly touched the space, causing red ripples. Although he could only vaguely sense it every time, his skills would be slightly improved after sobering up. This is also the confidence that he dared to aspire to the realm of the Grand Master. With a move of his eyes, Huo Jixing looked at the dazzling and eye-catching Xingxiu star, and the red-gold light filled his eyes. Pieces of fiery red feathers fell down, attached to his body skin, and turned into flame armor. It has been tested before. The terrifying defense brought by the flame armor allows him to charge into battle without hindrance. Now, he can feel a slight burning sensation from the flame armor, which is slightly stimulating his body, making his body more powerful under the burning effect of the Nanli fire. Physical strength is the core of Huo Jixing's use of the Nanli fire. At the same time, it is also what he has always pursued. Because of a strong body, he can use the Nanli fire to his heart's content. Unfortunately, Huo Jixing is now just barely maintaining the balance between his body and the Nanli fire, and is far from being unscrupulous. Jiangsu. Huo Jixing's eyes fell on the fifth star on the Suzaku star map. The bright flames made him eager to try. With the amount of essence he has now, he can already light up Jiangsu, and the data panel also prompts whether to open the Jiangsu star. However, he did not choose to open it immediately. The reason is very simple. Huo Jixing is currently in the heart of the Noxus Empire, which is very safe for the time being. And he has not yet digested the benefits brought by the Willow Star and the Star Star. When the time is right, he will light up the Jiang Star. Who would not desire such a powerful force? Huo Jixing's thoughts surged, thinking of the thunderstorms and blazing furnaces he saw during the Second Battle of Fruljord. Even though he was in the Noxian camp at the time, he still felt the horror of the power of the gods thoroughly. The immortal Thunder Volibear. Mountain Hidden Flame On. The Fruljord gods from the previous game just appeared before our eyes, and showed their power to change the situation on the battlefield. Huo Jixing's consciousness shifted slightly and he looked at the essence quantity. It would be great if he had this much essence before performing the mission. It's just a pity that there are no ifs in life and no assumptions in fate. Everything has already happened and cannot be undone. Huo Jixing sighed softly and opened his eyes. A bright red light illuminated the room and disappeared in an instant. Boom! Boom! There was a knock on the door, and Huo Jixing's spirit stretched out and he sensed the atmosphere outside the door. Is it time for dinner? Huo Jixing opened the door, looked at the sword boy Hainai at the door, and spoke softly. Mr. Wilson is here. He is waiting for you downstairs. Sword boy Hainai said respectfully. Talk about CAO. CAO arrives. I had mentioned Wilson to DeWitt before, but I didn't expect to see him that night. Huo Jixing and Hainai came to the first floor and saw Wilson waiting silently in the center of the room. Still the same. Wearing a red and grey robe, with piercing eyes, it seems that he can see through time. You're back so soon? Didn't you say you still have things to deal with? Huo Jixing asked with a smile after hugging Wilson. The matter went well and has been dealt with. At Huo Jixing's invitation, Wilson sat on a wooden chair and started chatting. Now the martial law in the capital of Noxus has been lifted. After applying, you can enter and leave the capital. Accompanied by the promulgation of Kui Farley Proclamation. The new lord of Noxus, Swain, and the returning hand of Noxus, Darius, worked together to suppress the noble forces in the Immortal Fortress. Plus the faceless men representatives sent by the Assassins' Guild. They began to rule the capital in the name of the Trifari Council, and from this center, they radiated power to the entire Noxus Empire. So fast. Huo Jixing looked surprised. Although he had long known that the Trifari Council would rule the Noxus Empire, Swain and the others were indeed a bit fast. I've long wanted to go in and have a look, if I apply. He looked at Wilson in front of him, his eyes wandering, as if he was waiting for something. Haha, you kid. Wilson chuckled, pointed at Huo Jixing, then took out a dark grey token from his arms and placed it on the table. Be careful. There has been some chaos in the capital recently. If you encounter an accident, just reveal your identity. Huo Jixing shrugged his shoulders, expressing his innocence. He was a stranger, someone unfamiliar with his place in the capital of Noxus, so if he had connections, he would definitely have connections. Then, he picked up the dark grey token in front of him, which felt good in his hand. You can see that the token is made entirely of steel, with 3 indentations printed on the front and the familiar Noxian double-edged axe logo on the back. He saw 3 dents and raised his eyebrows slightly, thinking of the 3 elements of power that represented the Trifari Council. Putting the token into his arms, Huo Jixing looked at Wilson and spoke. Don't worry, I'm very reasonable and I usually don't cause trouble. Chapter 90. In the dark room, the dim candle light lit up, illuminating the figures of 2 people. Wilson looked surprised, looked up at Huo Jixing, and shook his head gently. I'm afraid that others will provoke you. Although the dark clouds over the immortal fortress have been dispelled, there are still many hidden rats in the dark, frequently testing the Trifari Council. People like Huo Jixing who are labeled as Darius are most likely to attract the attention of those rats. Huo Jixing raised his eyebrows slightly, and instantly heard the meaning of Wilson's words, thinking about it. Then the 2 continued to chat about some anecdotes in the capital of Noxus. Mostly Wilson talked and Huo Jixing listened. Finally, after dinner, Wilson got up and said goodbye and left the 2-story building. Under the dim night, Huo Jixing leaned against the door, looking at Wilson's figure leaving on the street, his eyes flickering. Hidden rat Black Rose? He once again recalled Amaran's warning words. Roses are everywhere, and roses can penetrate any hole. Just don't mess with me. Huo Jixing muttered to himself, closed the door, and returned to the room. In the bedroom, the wooden window opened, and the dim starlight from the deep sky fell into the room. Huo Jixing lay on his back on the bed, looking at the stars dotting the sky, always feeling that he had forgotten something. It's Moore's suicide note. He remembered a blood-stained suicide note that DeWitt had given him, from Moore of the scout team. Like DeWitt, Moore was born in a slum outside the capital of Noxus. Because his family couldn't afford to eat, he joined the Imperial War Corps. I just happened to accompany DeWitt back, so I went to take a look by the way. Huo Jixing turned around, took out the suicide note pressed under the armor, looked at the coagulated blood on the suicide note, and wandered away. The next morning, the light golden sunlight penetrated the clouds, filling the winter air with a cool breath. The hill camp gradually revived, and the noise rose. Many Noxian soldiers showed a touch of joy on their faces. Huo Jixing and DeWitt finished their breakfast hastily, walked along the street, and saw the Noxian soldiers chatting and laughing. Realizing that the news of the lifting of martial law in the Noxian capital had spread throughout the camp. After leaving the camp, Huo Jixing and his party did not stop and went straight to the Noxian capital. About a quarter of an hour later, they saw the unfathomable dark grey city walls and the buildings lined up outside the city walls. Prosperity and poverty, but only separated by a wall, are like a natural moat. Huo Jixing had the dark grey token given by Wilson, and passed the inspection very smoothly and entered the Noxian capital area. They first walked along the wide and flat avenue, and then entered the high and low slums. Until then, looking at the slums in front of him, Huo Jixing realized some of his misunderstandings. It was similar to the medieval scenes recorded in the books of the previous life. There were piles of garbage everywhere and smelly black sewage. The narrow streets and the buildings on both sides looked extremely old and dilapidated. Some houses were no longer considered houses. Half of them collapsed, and broken tables and chairs could be seen inside. The clean and tidy sanitation system in Huo Jixing's mind seemed to exist only in the elite warband camp of Noxus, or the immortal fortress within the dark grey high walls. Huo Jixing shook his head gently, holding back his discomfort, followed DeWitt in the narrow streets, and smelled the unpleasant smell coming from the surroundings. There was sweat, feet, feces, and some rotten corpses. Huo Jixing looked down at the black marks on the corner of the street wall, quickened his pace, and at the same time told Hainai and Korda behind him to be careful with their feet. Crossing the street, they entered the alley full of yellow and grey things and garbage. After walking more than 100 steps, DeWitt came to a low and dilapidated bungalow, and walked hesitantly, as if he didn't dare to move forward. Huo Jixing saw a lot of pudding clothes hanging in the dilapidated room. Most of them were grey and black, and basically no other colorful colors could be seen. Why, are you a little scared when you get close? Huo Jixing walked over, rubbed DeWitt's head, and looked into the slightly timid eyes. The closer you get to home, the more timid you are, especially if you have survived the battlefield. He understood DeWitt's mood at the moment. It's time to go in, and take the gifts, don't drop them on the ground. Huo Jixing smiled softly. Then, he took Korda and moved away, so as not to disturb DeWitt. But in a moment, Huo Jixing faintly heard the excited voices coming from the bungalow, the sound of tables and chairs falling to the ground, and crying in different tones. He smiled softly, turned his head away, and looked around. The slums were indeed in ruins, with flies and rats running around. Occasionally, he saw children filling their stomachs with rainwater and pests in the cracks of the alleys. It's a world of difference, like heaven and earth. Huo Jixing retracted his gaze, and his inner thoughts were like a tide, with many ripples. He found that the slum scene he saw now was too different from the Noxus Empire he imagined in his mind. In his first impression, when he lived in the camp, he imagined that the society of the Noxus Empire was unusually tolerant. All the specialties and talents of everyone will be respected and cultivated in the empire. Instead of what is in front of him. The environment is dirty and smelly, and many children and civilians can't fill their stomachs or afford clothes. He then thought about the gifts DeWitt had prepared in the morning, which were some meat and heavy clothes received from the camp in his name. It's true. Huo Jixing couldn't use words to describe what he was thinking. He is not a moral model and cannot do the things of a saint. He can only hope that the Trifari Council will lead the empire to rise again and bring everyone the status they deserve. After waiting for a while, DeWitt walked out of the low and dilapidated bungalow and came to Huo Jixing. His red eyes told the excitement of the meeting. Captain 10, okay, I've already met with my family and told them. DeWitt said. When General Darius gives the order, I will apply to enter the Immortal Fortress. Because the Tri-Phalai Council has just been established, Darius has many urgent matters to deal with. Things such as rewards for military achievements have not yet been implemented, but specific news has been spread. Huo Jixing turned around and looked past DeWitt. He saw two dirty children sticking their heads out in front of the old wooden door, their cheeks dirty. A man and a woman, they look very young, about 7 or 8 years old. They looked over from a distance, seemingly curious, and when they saw Huo Jixing's gaze, they immediately retracted their heads. After hesitating, I poked it out again, which was very fun. Your brother and sister? Huo Jixing said softly. Yes. DeWitt scratched the back of his head, his expression couldn't hide his happiness. I haven't seen them for almost 3 years, and they were a little strange when they met me just now. Fortunately, I used some deli meat strips to attract their attention. DeWitt excitedly shared what happened when he returned home, saying that his father was not at home and only his mother and younger siblings were at home. Wait until the emotions are almost released. Huo Jixing and his party continued to move forward in the slum, this time going to Moore's home. Halfway through, Korda, who was an elite scout, walked quickly to Huo Jixing and spoke in a low voice, his eyes flashing. Someone followed us a lot. It's okay. We are strangers. If we come in like this, someone will definitely notice it. Huo Jixing nodded gently, and from the corner of his eyes, he looked towards the dark alley behind him and saw a pair of alert and coveted eyes. It's rare for outsiders to walk these streets without guards. DeWitt pointed to the alleys extending in all directions and spoke softly. Especially after night, a lot of strange things happen. Huo Jixing put his left hand on the handle of the knife and looked at the dark and dirty street with cold eyes. Guards? Those guys are far inferior to us. They were the elite warriors who defeated the Winter's Claw tribe and won the Second Battle of the Fruljord for the Empire. Already experienced the baptism of life and death.